any sleep. That's why I'm grumpy.
Secondly, to me, it looks like Microsoft now gets Altman and Brockman and maybe 500 other employees pretty much for salaries, right? I guess maybe a signing bonus, but they don't have to spend $86 billion, or even if you take out their 13, $73 billion. Isn't that a huge win?
Right. OpenAI has 770 employees. 500 of those have signed a letter to the board this morning, which I've seen, saying that if the board doesn't resign, those 500 will resign and they will go to Microsoft. When Satya Nadella posted on X last night, he buried the lead. It was a very long statement. The idea that Sam and Greg Brockman, the former chair of OpenAI's board, were joining Microsoft was right at the bottom, but there was very clear language there, and I'd ask the audience to go and look out for it. It said, those two with others joining from OpenAI. Satya said it last night, so that's a very real risk. And what I would say is that at the core of this story is that OpenAI is almost the entirety of its value, and Mandeep may disagree here, but the entirety of its value that the investors outlined to me is its intellectual capital. That if you take those top 10 data scientists and the top product guys, which is Sam Altman, and you take them somewhere else, OpenAI has nothing left. That's what we're talking about here.
Okay, I'm looking, Mandeep.
Except for the IP that Mandeep was...
That's what I'm saying, Mandeep. I'm looking at Microsoft stock. It's only up 0.7%. I would have thought it would have been up 10% or more. Why do you think that is?
And look, OpenAI has a lot of other investors too. So granted, Microsoft owns 49% of the company, but there are other investors, the private rounds that they had before Microsoft got on board. And so I think...
By the way, can I just ask quickly to clarify? Microsoft owns 49% of the for-profit unit in the nonprofit structure,
Correct.
or do they own 49% of the whole thing?
49% of the whole thing, but Ed can confirm if that's he has a different point of view.
Ed?
Well, on paper, on the balance sheet of Microsoft, it will show the OpenAI LLC, or the incorporated for-profit business. But again, the audience, there's a Venn diagram, or a diagram out there, sorry, not a Venn diagram, that sets it out. And you can say, but Mandeep is right, 49% Microsoft holds. I'd make one observation, that the other 51% on the cap table, my understanding is that even the biggest individual shareholders, from a venture firm perspective, own less than 1% each, which is another reason that this is so chaotic right now.
Right, and Altman says he owns none.
Well, so, I mean, look, at the end of the day, there is a lot of IP within OpenAI. If the employees leave, they can't take that IP. And that's the thing about a tech company is, if I have an algorithm or a model that's within a company, unless Microsoft ends up buying that company, they don't have rights to the OpenAI foundational model. And for employees to recreate that, let's say the 500 employees recreate that model within 6 months. What is your IP? I mean, any other company can do it then. So it puts Microsoft in a tough spot because on the one hand, it could show that AI, large language models, are a commodity. On the other hand, they may have to buy the whole company for $80 billion because the other 51% want a good exit. They don't want the company to die away.
So Ed, 30 seconds. What are you reporting on? What are you guys working on today? What are you chasing today?
Okay. The big thing is going to be private markets. There was a tender that was open for hundreds of billions of dollars for employees of OpenAI to sell shares to Thrive Capital. My understanding is that is very much in doubt. Friday, the market for private OpenAI stock was incredibly liquid, very unusual.
In doubt
for
is
private
probably
companies.
the polite way to say it.
Yes, that liquidity slammed shut Friday while I was having lunch with a source who was trying to buy in that market. Look out for that. People are going to get burned. These are transactions that were pending and will now not go through.
I'd say got burned.
Yeah.
That story's over.
Ed, thank you so much for joining us. Ed, I know you're busy. Ed Ludlow and your team out there for Bloomberg Technology. Mandeep Singh, Senior Technology Analyst for Bloomberg Intelligence. Appreciate getting you two folks together as we continue to report on this dynamic technology story. Let's get some company news right now with Lisa Mateo.
You got to call. Citigroup is eliminating more than 300 senior manager roles. Now, sources tell Bloomberg it will affect staffers 2 levels below CEO Jane Fraser's executive management team. That's amounting to about 10% of the workers at that level. It's It's part of Fraser's efforts to simplify the lender. A statement from the company did not announce the number of cuts. Citigroup right now up just a fraction. Amazon is stepping up the competition in the battle for talent with Microsoft, Google, and other companies. Bloomberg's Steve Rappaport has that story.
Lisa, the Wall Street Journal reports the e-commerce giant is launching free classes on artificial intelligence with a goal to train 2 million people in the technology by 2025. AI Ready is centered on 8 online courses that focus on generative AI and target people with both tech and tech-related roles, from beginners to more advanced.
Amazon up just a fraction. And a few leadership changes to tell you about this morning. NRG Energy CEO Mauricio Gutierrez is leaving the company. It comes after the independent power producer reached a deal with activist investor Elliott Investment Management. Chairman Lawrence Coben will become interim CEO. Shares right now, they are down just a fraction. Former White House Chief of Staff Ron Klain, who served during President Biden's first 2 years in office, has a new role. Airbnb says he will join the company as Chief Legal Officer on January 1st. Airbnb right now up about 1%. And Morgan Stanley has named Jed Finn to head the company's $4.8 trillion wealth management business. It's part of co-president Andy Saperstein's revamp of his leadership team for the investment bank's money management divisions. Those are the company stories we're following this hour. I'm Lisa Mateo, and this is Bloomberg.
Headlines and breaking news 24 hours a day at Bloomberg.com, on Bloomberg Television, and the Bloomberg Business app. This is a Bloomberg Business Flash.
And I'm John Tucker in the Bloomberg Newsroom with this Bloomberg Business Flash. The major averages keep pressing higher. Information technology among the best performing industry groups in the S&P 500. And that's where Microsoft resides. It's among the most active, up 0.9% as OpenAI co-founder Sam Altman is hired there. On the data front, the Conference Board leading economic index that fell 0.8% in the month of October, and that was more than forecast. Traders currently pricing in about a 30% chance of a first rate cut from the Fed in March. That follows the cool inflation data that we had last week. And then some of the individual shares on the move. I got to mention Bayer, or Bayer, if you prefer, dropping the most in its history. That has lost about $8.3 billion in market value after suffering a major courtroom and drug development setback. S&P 500, 11 points higher. That's up 0.3%. We're at 45.25 at the index. The Dow Jones Industrial Average, 62 points higher. That's up 0.2%. The NASDAQ 100, 70 points higher, up 0.4% right now. And Microsoft shares, they are up right now 0.8%. And we check the markets for you all day long, right here on Bloomberg Radio. I'm John Tucker. That is your Bloomberg Business Flash. Matt and Paul.
What's your take on Bayer versus Bayer?
Well, the commercials for their products in the United States say Bayer aspirin. Over in Europe, it's buyer. So I'm in the United States. I'm here
I'm
with
with you. It's a thing that I struggle with because there are some names like Porsche. That's a family name.
That's a family name.
You know,
And
but
as
in America, ever since Risky Business, at least, everyone says Porsche.
And I'll
You know?
give you
Wasn't the line Porsche, there
Adidas
is
as
no
well.
substitute?
That was the line from the company, but Tom Cruise, when he's talking about the 928 S4 that he drives in Risky Business, he says Porsche, and so does pretty much
Oh, I
everybody
thought
else.
he said Porsche.
No.
Okay.
So, but there's a lot of different, like, for example, we said Kiev collectively as an American society until until last year, right? Then all of a sudden everybody decided to say Kiev
had a
instead.
memo on that.
One syllable.
Well,
Yeah.
it depends on where you are.
But,
I mean,
well, okay, but the thing is, we don't say Paris when we're talking about the capital
and
of
I
France.
don't say Manawaniarawa.
I defer to John Tucker on all this stuff. Memos be
Yeah,
damned.
just go
Yeah,
with
that's
me.
why I asked him.
Just go with me.
He's the expert. All right, John Tucker, thank you so much. We appreciate it. All right, so Matt and I were just talking, like, one of the key fundamental issues here in this OpenAI seems to be the debate within OpenAI and within the tech industry and with, I guess, just kind of the tech world in general about AI, weighing commercialization versus the fact that this thing could end civilization. So that seems to be getting a little bit lost here in some of the reporting here today. But maybe our next guest can help us out. Jim Anderson, he's the CEO of Beacon Software. He joins us live here in our Bloomberg Interactive Brokers studio. So Jim, how do you guys, in that space, in the software space, how do you think about AI in terms of commercializing it, but by also being cognizant of the potential risk it could pose?
Yeah, Paul, it won't surprise you to hear that we think first about commercializing it, right? Because if you can't commercialize it, you don't have anything to really worry about, right? So in the eyes of a sort of a capitalist or a private sector person, you tend to focus on that first. I think one of the things social media has taught us is, hey, let's not collectively be so naive about the negatives. Let's not wait a decade and see what damage we've wrought and then see if we can undo it. So I do think there's, including with private sector capitalistic companies, there's a lot more willingness to try to anticipate those negative effects. But, the OpenAI example is an extreme example of a capitalistic company worth reportedly $80 billion, according to Microsoft, run by a nonprofit with a very different sensibility. And it's not really surprising that you ended up with a very different view of the world.
Well, and as we know with social media, you just can't put the genie back in the bottle, right? And the problem is where social media seems to now, in hindsight, be a cancer on society that we can't cure. AI could be like a massive cardiac arrest. I mean, it could just kill us all. But no one can care about that anymore. Since we can make money on it today, it doesn't matter if it's going to destroy society in, decades.
Yeah, I don't know that I would agree that nobody can care about it anymore. But
you can care, but you can't do anything about it.
You can't stop it.
Yeah.
Right. But I think it's interesting. I mean, we could have a debate about Skynet and whether the end of humanity, how likely that is to happen. I think the risk of that is it misses, if everything is the extinction of humanity or not. I mean, you've sort of dialed it up to 11, right? There's nothing less than that. I think there are plenty of near-term harms that are much more likely, that will happen much more quickly, that we run the risk of glossing over. And think about it, right? Remember the early days of email, right? This is amazing. I can communicate with people. And then scammers, grifters, fraudsters, and marketers decided, hey, I can send 1 billion emails for the same price as one, and all of our inboxes started being flooded. Well, now basically content creation is effectively free with ChatGPT and those kinds of tools. With AI, now I think the entire internet runs the risk of being flooded with spam, misinformation, and just garbage. And we're all going to have a very pragmatic challenge, sort of managing through that. Never mind the terrible potential long-term use cases. Just in the near term, we're going to have a lot of real problems because bad actors are going to take these tools and do bad things with them.
So just AI in general, I mean, with OpenAI, I guess as we speak, part of Microsoft now, what are the competitors out there in just in artificial intelligence? What are the competitors, and does it change? It seems like it's got to change the competitive landscape.
No doubt it will. I mean, you want to say, okay, what are the chatbot competitors who are building large language models? That Google's got Bard, Anthropic was a former AI person. There's a couple of them out there, but building your own large language model is like $1 billion proposition. So it's not going to be dozens of these things.
Okay.
It's a big tech kind of investment. But I think what's interesting is you raise a point about we all tend to think of AI in terms of ChatGPT and chatbots. and that's really amazing, and it's got some really interesting use cases. But think about other worlds like transportation, healthcare, manufacturing. AI has the ability to transform those industries. Traffic, like imagine a world where autonomous vehicles, and those have their own sets of challenges, can untangle traffic in big cities, and we no longer have to sit in traffic jams. Imagine a world where radiologists don't miss scans on X-rays or MRIs and things like that. I mean, there's plenty of use cases where AI can truly help humanity in substantive, powerful ways that have nothing to do with chatbots, that are powered by AI and these underlying large language models.
So the large language model, or the data set, I guess, is the most important issue that you deal with. How do you look at this from Beacon Software perspective? Like, what data sets are the most important? Which ones do you want to get a hold of? Which ones can we not touch? It's such a huge issue, right?
Yeah, it is. And at Beacon, we've specialized in transportation, right? So we're working with state DOTs, Georgia and other states, to say, okay, how are you going to untangle traffic, mainly in your big cities, which is where you've got it? Well, they're actually awash in data. They've got more data than they know what to do with, than they can effectively store, than they can effectively harness. And what's AI great at? Taking a massive data set and making sense of it. And these connected vehicles, now think about it. Every time you've got a Tesla on the road, every time you turn your windshield wipers on, there's a signal right there. That's been captured, and you say, well, who cares? Well, guess what? If you harnessed every vehicle on the road and you knew when their windshield wipers were on at what level, you now have a hyper-local precipitation map that's the likes of which nobody else has, right?
That is awesome.
So those kinds of that, right? But you've got to be able to capture the data, you've got to be able to intelligently use the data, and you've got to not be able to drown in the data, which is what everybody is facing right now. And AI, to oversimplify, AI has the ability to keep you from drowning in data like you have been.
Is there, who's thinking about how AI should be managed, regulated? Is anybody thinking about that out there?
There's lots of thinking. The question is, anybody doing anything about it? So I think, again, let's give credit where credit's due. I think regulators, legislators, and even the companies themselves are thinking about it and are talking about it. And I think there's legitimate criticism. Great, you just want to think and talk about it and never do anything as a way of deflecting. The EU, of course, takes a leadership role in a lot of things around privacy and data protection and all that. Would stand to reason they might take a more aggressive, and they already have, started to take steps towards a more aggressive position than the U.S. I think you're going to we are going to ask the big tech companies to be more responsible and maybe sign up to a higher standard than we would have a decade ago. Okay, Microsoft, okay, Google, okay, Facebook, Meta, those types of companies, we're going to expect more out of them. But I think at the end of the day, especially in the U.S., ultimately Congress is going to have to get involved. And
great.
Yeah, they have a few issues.
The questioning coming from our Congress.
I won't mention. There are a few I can definitely imagine, but it's a horror show thinking about it. So how long, Jim, until we have real leaps forward in like autonomous driving? And I mean, the real question is, how long is it going to be until we have far fewer deaths from traffic accidents?
Yeah, I'm glad you mentioned that, because we've got 43,000 people a year die on U.S. roads. It is a public health crisis. I mean, people don't typically think about it that way. And those are human-driven cars. So there's a crying need for that. But we just saw lost over the weekend in all of the OpenAI news, Cruise, the robotaxi company CEO, stepped down. I don't know if you saw that.
Yeah.
But you've controversy because they were not open and transparent. There was an incident involving a robotaxi in San Francisco. Somebody was seriously injured. They didn't really quite disclose what happened, and so they lost trust there. And so it's striking to me, this sort of, everybody wants to move fast, but if you move too fast, you end up going slower, right? Because all you're going to do is create a backlash. You're going to set the entire industry back a year or two. I don't know what the time frame will be, but I think it's critical that companies involved, and Tesla as being maybe the most notable of this around this autonomous driving, is running the risk of sort of poisoning the well and setting things back because they're being too aggressive. And to the beginning of our conversation, right, what does big tech do? They just know how to do big tech, right? They go fast. I'm a private sector company. I've got to grab adoption while it's there. I've got to move fast. What's the famous line Facebook had? Move fast and break things, right? Until they realize they broke something maybe significant.
Exactly. All right, Jim, thanks so much for joining us. Jim Anderson, he's the CEO of Beacon Software. His job is to fix the traffic in Atlanta, Georgia. Good luck with that. Beacon Software, appreciate him coming into our Bloomberg Interactive Broker studio. Markets, they are higher today. The S&P 500 is up about 0.25%, so we'll take that to start out the week. Right now, let's head down to Washington, D.C. We'll get rolled in national news with Amy Mars.
All right, thank you, Paul. Israel says it has more proof. The Gaza hospital at the center of its military operations in the enclave was used by by Hamas as a command center. Israel's military says video shows hostages being rushed into that hospital on October 7th. Israel says Hamas has used a network of tunnels under the hospital for military purposes and to hide hostages. Now the White House says Israel is as close as it's ever been to reaching a deal with Hamas to release some of those hostages. Brown University political scientist Wendy Schiller says there are risks with Israel working with Qatar to free the captives.
Generally, we have an ally in Qatar. We're not always a big fan of everything they do, but generally we work with them. And so them as an intermediary in terms of Israel-Palestine, Israel-Hamas is one aspect of it, but it's also our relationship with them in the Middle East that's also on the line.
Wendy Schiller directs Brown-Taubman Center for American Politics and Policy. Libertarian outsider Javier Milei won Argentina's presidency, promising a radical shakeup to fix decades of policy mismanagement. Bloomberg's Rodrigo Orjuela tells us what we should be watching for next.
First big thing is exactly how he builds up his team. He's made a lot of big promises. Nobody's sure how many of those he will keep or not. Getting rid of the central bank, dollarizing the economy. So the first indication will be who are his ministers.
Bloomberg's Rodrigo Orjuela. The First Lady, nicknamed Steel Magnolia, has died. Rosalind Carter died at her home in Plains, Georgia. She's being remembered for her work for the cause of human rights and mental health around the world. Dr. Rebecca Brendel is a psychiatrist at Massachusetts General and former president of the American Psychiatric Association.
For the past 50 years, really, she was a leading voice, not just to the profession, but also to Americans about how important mental health is.
Rosalind Carter was 96 years old. Global news 24 hours a day and whenever you want it with Bloomberg News Now. I'm Amy Morris, and this is Bloomberg.
markets, headlines, and breaking news 24 hours a day at Bloomberg.com, on Bloomberg Television, and the Bloomberg Business app. This is a Bloomberg Business Flash.
And I'm John Tucker in the Bloomberg Newsroom with this Bloomberg Business Flash. After 3 straight weeks of gains, major stock averages marching higher. Still, S&P 500 has jumped 9.6% over the past 3 weeks. Microsoft up 0.9% right now, among the most active. It's the leader in the S&P 500. It's the leader in the NASDAQ, and just about the leader in the Dow Jones Industrial Average as well. Part of the sentiment behind today's stock rally is that the Fed is done and will be cutting rates sooner than expected next year. Economist Dennis Gartman is pushing back against the market sentiment, and we spoke to him earlier today.
They may have one more increase, but it's going to be a long period of time before the Fed moves to ease monetary policy and allow the overnight Fed funds rate to decline. I've said it's going to be late in 2024, maybe early 2025 before they actually do so.
And on the data front, we're going to get the Fed minutes. They're out tomorrow. Black Friday and Cyber Monday spending expected to hit a new high. This is according to an annual survey that Deloitte does. Consumers plan to increase spending by 13% from last year, if their survey is accurate. Right now, the S&P 500, 11 points higher. That's up about 0.3%, 45.25 in the index. The Dow Jones Industrial Average up 64 points, and that is up 0.2%. NASDAQ 100, 65 points higher. That is up 0.4%. And again, Microsoft shares, they are up 0.75%. And we check the markets for you all day long, right here on Bloomberg Radio. I'm John Tucker. That is your Bloomberg Business Flash. Matt and Paul.
JT, thank you so much for that. John Tucker there with the Bloomberg Business Flash. We have had a market that just seems to rally any chance it's given this month, and last month also was pretty incredible, at least for stocks, right? It was tough for commodities amidst the geopolitical events, and you would have expected, I think, for example, oil to rise and stocks to get crushed after the Hamas attack on Israel and then the subsequent war. Let's bring in Nancy Curtin right now. She's a partner, global CIO, and head of investment advisory over at Alti Tiedemann Global. And Nancy and Tiedemann have done a study on geopolitical events and found that they don't really always have the effect that we would expect. Isn't that right, Nancy?
Yeah, if you go back in history, there have been sort of 24 significant geopolitical events since Pearl Harbor, and about 10 of those involved war or conflict. So they're not just things that are just skirmishes. They actually did involve conflict. And 90% of the time, the geopolitical event did not have a lasting impact on markets because it didn't have a lasting impact either on the inflation or the economy. And of course, those two things are related. Now, look, you might ask, well, what about that 10%, right? You're talking about 90%. And yeah, sure, there are times of, the oil embargo of the 70s is a good example. But, at the moment, we look at it and we say to think about how we can potentially de-escalate. So our sense is this won't have a lasting impact on the economy. But, it remains to be seen. Of course, the transition mechanism would be higher oil prices. And I point out at the moment that oil is down about 20%, really, since the conflict began.
Nancy, the markets seem to be implying that, maybe we saw peak rates back there in late October. What do you think?
We may just get what I call higher for not so much longer. And what I mean by that, the Fed said three things when they met after their last FOMC meeting, and that is that they would have greater confidence that they were getting closer to their 2% target if a couple of things happen. One, U.S. growth slowed from the torrid pace of the third quarter, right? GDP was 4.9%, and consumption was 4%. And secondly, that the labor market begun to soften. And third, that inflation trended down. Now, look, I would say we've had pretty good news on all three of those fronts over the last couple of weeks. I think this explains why markets are up close to 10%. You know, whether you look at retail sales, ISM data, manufacturing, industrial production, it's clear the U.S. economy is moderating. And take a look at Walmart, Target, saying they're seeing sales come off in the last couple of weeks here. So, you know, it looks like the third quarter is moderating to a fourth quarter of about 2% GDP growth from, torrid pace in the third quarter. You know, you saw obviously the jobs number, 150K, that was a good number versus expectations. And of course, last week you had, job claims and unemployment benefits, again, rising. And then you had, a pretty good inflation number last week. Let's face it, not only was, headline inflation 3.2%, by the way, that's the average since 1914. So, that's a good number. It's not at the Fed's number, but that's a good number. And headline inflation around 4%. But what we think is really interesting about the inflation numbers last week was that you saw this owner equivalent rent shelter costs come down. They came down from 8% to about 6.7%. And we think they will continue to decline. And remember, that's about 45% of core CPI. And if you look at forward indicators like Zillow, et cetera, it's about half that level. So we do think the data announcements in the last couple of weeks are pretty significant. And remember, as inflation declines, unless the Fed begins to ease up on its monetary policy stance, actually policy gets more restricted, tighter. So look, I think this was good news here. Passive tightening, exactly.
So Nancy, Nancy, do you expect, that passive tightening, and rates are already relatively high to where, anybody under 30 remembers them ever being. Do you expect us to have a rise in unemployment next year, a significant rise? Do you expect us to have a significant slowdown in growth? I mean, clearly we'll be slower than Q3, right? But I mean, are we going to see 1 or 2%, or is it going to be less?
So what we've been saying is we think growth will slow from that torrid pace, the 4.9 in the third quarter, maybe to about 1%. Look, the fourth quarter may still come in at 2% here if we look at current data. But I think something to keep in mind, the Fed has a dual mandate, which is price stability and sustainable maximum employment, right? And so I think the Fed needs to be quite careful here not to be too restrictive so they throw the U.S. economy into recession, harming the labor market if they don't have to. And, what a legacy for Chair Powell to be remembered as, the Fed chair that was able to maneuver into a soft landing. And we do think that is possible. And as a matter of fact, we think, gosh, you need to think twice about being too restrictive here, imposing a lot of difficulty on pain on the labor market if you don't have to, and inflation starts heading lower. And by the way, take a look at inflation, not just the United States, but this is a global phenomenon. You saw inflation in the EU, in the UK, all heading lower in the last couple of weeks.
And Nancy, about 30 seconds left. Where are you finding the most opportunity right here, right now?
So a couple of different things. Look, on the equity side, we think you have to lean into areas that have been unloved, perhaps have underperformed. So, for example, mid-cap and some of the sectors in the market that haven't really participated in the rally, which has been so much driven by the Magnificent Seven. Now, that doesn't mean that we come out of U.S. large cap. It's just that we have tilts in the portfolio to areas of the market that have been less loved. We like private credit. Look, we think cost of capital has gone up. That's an opportunity for our clients. We can get double-digit type returns in credit, super nice, high up in the capital structure, senior secured. Thank you very much. And we've been lengthening maturity in government bonds to take advantage. If we can lock in 5% yields for 7 to 10 years, that's pretty attractive. So lots of different opportunities here as the markets, are interpreting the news, so to speak.
Nancy, thank you so much for joining us. Always appreciate getting your perspective. Nancy Curtin, partner, global CIO, head of investment advisory at Alti Tiedemann Global, leaning into some of the opportunities in the market. I like that private credit call. That's certainly one that gets your attention. We're going to have more coming up. This is Bloomberg. Let's get some company news right now. Lisa Mateo.
Good morning, Paul. Shares of Microsoft are higher there, up nearly 1%. And this after the company announced it hired ousted OpenAI chief Sam Altman and former OpenAI president Greg Brockman to lead a new AI development team. We get more on what this means for Microsoft with Bloomberg's Tom McKenzie.
They continue to have their investment in OpenAI. We'll watch if that holds on the back of this. And now they have Altman and Brockman within Microsoft building out this new AI research team. Of course, Alphabet, Google, they have DeepMind, and that's very much, of course, embedded within the Google infrastructure. And that's done huge progress and has made huge progress over the last decade. This is an opportunity for Microsoft, arguably, to close the gap on that front while still having exposure to OpenAI and all of their corporate clients.
But if OpenAI workers had their way, Sam Altman would be back on the job. And they're taking action. Bloomberg's Ed Ludlow has that story.
Around 2/3 of the remaining OpenAI staff have signed a letter to the board, which we at Bloomberg have just reviewed. And they're saying to the board that they need to reflect on how they've acted. And almost 500 of those employees are threatening to resign and walk away if the board doesn't engage with them.
And some management changes over at Fidelity International. CEO Ann Richards is stepping down after 5 years leading the asset manager. Now, according to a statement, Richards will stay with the company as vice chair to help Fidelity with its external relationships and also its strategic partnerships. A spokesperson did not give a reason for Richards' decision to leave and did not name a successor or even give a time frame for the handoff. Stay tuned. Those are the company stories we're following this hour. We'll have more Bloomberg Markets in just a bit. I'm Lisa Mateo, and this is Bloomberg.
This is Bloomberg Markets with Paul Sweeney and Matt Miller on Bloomberg Radio.
All right, looking at these markets here, we have some green on the screen to start this holiday week. The S&P 500 is up about almost 0.4%. The NASDAQ, I'm calling that out. That's up 0.6% there. Yields a little bit higher here. 10-year Treasury, 4.46% on the 10-year. Crude oil, a little bit of a comeback here, up 2.5%, just under $78 per barrel. And for Tom Keene, I'm going to call out Bitcoin. It's up over 1% here, $37,400 on the cryptocurrency. Right now, let's head down to Washington, D.C. World and national news with Amy Marson.
Thank you, Paul. The Israel-Hamas war is now on day 42. Israel reportedly close to dismantling the military system in the northern part of the Gaza Strip, and its forces will start to focus on the southern part of the region. Israeli forces taking control of many parts of the Al-Shifa hospital, and over the weekend showed videos they say prove Hamas exploited the facility, building a command center and tunnels underneath it. We get more with Israeli government spokesman Eylon Levy.
Last night, the IDF released footage of a tunnel on the grounds of the Shifa hospital. It then extends for 55 meters until you reach a blast door with a gun hole in it. And that's in addition to the evidence that Hamas used the Shifa hospital on October 7th in order to hold hostages.
Israeli government spokesman Eylon Levy on Bloomberg Daybreak. Former President Donald Trump and Texas Governor Greg Abbott served Thanksgiving meals yesterday at an airport hangar near the southern border to nearly 200 Texas National Guard soldiers, Department of Public Safety troopers, and other border officials. They'll all be stationed on the southern border over Thanksgiving. Afterwards, the governor endorsed Trump's 2024 bid, praising him for his border policies.
We need a president who's going to secure the border. We need a president who's going to restore law and order in the United States of America.
Trump says if he's elected, he will create camps for undocumented immigrants, deputize local police and National Guard troops to carry out raids, and expel migrants without due process hearings. Americans can order more free COVID-19 tests from the government. COVIDtests.gov is offering those who already ordered their 4 free tests from the website earlier this fall an additional 4 tests. Those who haven't ordered any yet, since the website relaunched in September, can order all 8. Global news 24 hours a day and whenever you want it with Bloomberg News Now. I'm Amy Morris, and this is Bloomberg. Paul and Matt.
Amy Morris, thank you so much. We appreciate it. All right. It's a perennial annoyance, ruining quiet weekends in U.S. suburbia. The roar of the neighbor's lawnmower, the whine of a trimmer, the howl of a leaf blower. But if you're in California, California, the racket will soon be on its way out. The state, which has long been a leader in environmental policy, will become the first to ban the sale of gasoline-powered lawnmowers and other landscaping tools.
You can take my leaf blower when you take it from my cold, dead hands.
Agree with you 100%. And also, I don't think it's an annoyance. I mean, no offense to Simone Foxman. She's a brilliant reporter. I've worked with her for many years. She wrote this story. To me, that is the sound of suburbia. Like, I grew up with that sound, and if it disappeared on the weekends, it would be a little bit spooky.
All right, here, I'll go. Lawnmower, no problem. The gasoline leaf powers, man, those things are brutal.
Yeah, but have you used an electric leaf blower? They simply do not work as well.
I know.
No,
How about a
the
rake?
electric lawnmowers and electric leaf blowers, forget it. They just don't have the oomph. At least not in my yard. I have, like, super leaves.
Yeah, I also will say that, just a couple of years ago, obviously bought a new house and I'm getting all new equipment. I thought about this because I'm pretty sure in Scarsdale, we're already not allowed to use electric or gasoline-powered leaf blowers.
You're not allowed to have 27 cars in your driveway, too.
Also an issue. I'm a redneck. What can I say? But I asked the lawn care professionals around, and they all had these horror stories of like leaving battery-powered equipment in their garage, which is what started the house fire, right?
Yeah, right.
So, and the other thing they said is it just doesn't move as much air. So you got to use the gas-powered leaf blower. So I think it's against regulations, but I use it anyway.
This gets me so mad that today, when I go home, I'm firing up the chainsaw. I don't have anything to cut. I'm just going to in the backyard.
Get Simone Foxman in here. What is she thinking?
Yeah, we'll bring her. All right, here. The rule isn't just a noise control measure. It's primarily aimed at reducing emissions from small off-road engines that are more polluting than all the cars in the state combined. Wow. How about that? See, I didn't know that part. But you do think about it, they do emit a lot of smoke.
It's a problem, but relative to AI, the dangers of AI.
Relative to AI, we got it. Context is everything.
This is Bloomberg Markets with Paul Sweeney and Matt Miller.
Why were the economists so wrong? What are the economists getting wrong?
Isn't this a slam dunk time to buy U.S. Treasuries?
Soft landing, hard landing, no landing. I don't know.
True. What the heck does that mean?
I don't know.
Breaking market news and insight from Bloomberg experts.
We're going to be in an environment with higher rates for longer.
The 5-day in-office work week is effectively dead.
It's definitely a good sign that we're not ready to land this economy just yet.
This is Bloomberg Markets with Paul Sweeney and Matt Miller on Bloomberg Radio.
All right, coming up in this hour, we're going to try to get a little bit smarter on this whole open AI story. When I got on the train this morning at 5:30, I said, I got to get smart on this issue. So thankfully, Max Chafkin wrote an in-depth piece for Bloomberg Business Week, and we're going to get Max on here, and he's going to debrief us on what we need to know here and why it's important. And then Matt Siegel, he's head of digital assets research at Van Eck. He's going to join us to discuss Wall Street's bullish outlook on Bitcoin ETFs and how the Argentinian election could impact Bitcoin prices. I didn't see that angle, but he's got it for us.
He's also, I will say, I'm excited to talk to Matt because he's got some, I'm going to guess, pretty extreme views on a lot of things, including AI.
Oh,
so
okay,
we can
we'll
ask him about that story as well.
All right, and then Shonali Baskett, she's our Wall Street reporter for Bloomberg. Citi's got some job cuts. Morgan Stanley's got some wealth management changes. So lots of stuff happening on Wall Street, and Shonali will bring us up to date on all of it. And we're going to kick off this hour with John Tucker. He's got a Bloomberg Business Week.
All right, Matt and Paul, S&P 500, even without the top 5 names, has bounced back in November amid bets the Fed's going to start cutting rates sooner than expected as inflation, the rate of inflation, starts to cool. We're entering the 4th week of seeing gains. We have 8 of the 11 major industry groups in the index higher right now. Information technology, the best performer, and of course, that's where you're going to find shares of Microsoft. Microsoft shares up right now 1.25% on the OpenAI news. Meantime, Mark Heffley at UBS, he's advising clients to buy quality names.
We recently, about 2 weeks ago, upgraded the U.S. tech sector again, in part because that's where we're finding quality, and there certainly is, over the longer term, this kind of big is going to do better theme that we want to play on.
One of the other better performing industry groups is energy as crude oil. That is higher, up $1.85 for West Texas at 77.74 a barrel. S&P 500 18 points higher, up 0.4%, 45.32 on the index. Dow up 99 points. The Nasdaq 100 106 points higher. That is up 0.7%. And not a surprise, we actually previewed this, but Citigroup eliminating more than 300 senior managers. This is part of the restructuring that's underway with the CEO, Jane Fraser. And we check the markets for you all day long right here on Bloomberg Radio. I'm John Tucker. That is your Bloomberg Business Flash. Matt and Paul.
Paul, I'm interested because the Citi senior executive story got me thinking.
Yep.
I always talk to you about, when you've done well on Wall Street and you tell your boss, pay me or I'm going across the street. What is it like working on Wall Street when there's a downturn, when senior managers, when the top tier is getting fired? Can you still go across the street?
It's happened to me twice. And so one time I did go across the street, literally when I left Citi, the next day I went to Credit Suisse First Boston. When I left Credit Suisse First Boston, no seat.
No. The music stopped and golf.
The music stopped and golf course. And then thankfully Bloomberg called a while later. So it happens. So and the issue is kind of where you are in your career. If you're late 40s or 50, goodbye. That's ageism. You're out.
Then you have to go and do something that contributes positively to the society.
Exactly, like talk on the radio. So that's kind of where we are. Matt Miller, Paul Sweeney live here in our Bloomberg Interactive Broker Studio. We're doing the streaming thing on YouTube. And now Bloomberg is in your dashboard with Apple CarPlay and Android Audio. It gives you access to every Bloomberg podcast, live audio feeds from Bloomberg Radio, print stories from Bloomberg News in audio form, and the latest headlines at the click of a button with Bloomberg News Now. How do you get it? Well, it's free. That's the good news to start with. And it's free with the latest version of the Bloomberg Business app. That's the Bloomberg Business app. Get it on your phone in the Apple App Store or on Google Play. Just download the app, connect your phone to your car, and get started. It's all presented by our sponsor, Interactive Broker. So good stuff there. We've got some green on the screen. I'll take that to start this Thanksgiving week. Let's break it down with some of the stories there. Bloomberg's equities reporter, Carmen Reineke. Carmen, what are you looking at?
Yeah, so the first one I'm looking at today is Penn Entertainment, ticker PENN. Shares are up almost 6% today, the most in about 2 weeks. Bank of America upgrading the gaming company to buy from neutral, citing its newly launched sports betting partnership with ESPN, which is called ESPN Bet.
Yep.
Yeah, so that launched 2 weeks ago. Analyst Sean Kelly saying that it's dominating initial download activity. So,
I tell you, online betting is just, I'm not an online bettor person, but I know people just go nuts over this stuff.
I mean, my British friends from a very young age would sit and watch any sports event with a laptop and bet on a number of different issues in the game. But I guess, and they're addicted to it, by the way. But what we're trying to do in this country is foster that addiction among younger people. And Penn is at the forefront of that. By the way, the stock is down like 12, 13% year to date. It had a huge spike during the pandemic, but it really has never gotten back to those heights. It was up to almost $600.
Well, they're all trying to compete against DraftKings, I think. So that's kind of the thing.
DraftKings down slightly today.
Okay. All right.
Yeah.
All right,
Pretty
what
much
else you got?
unchanged. So we already talked about Microsoft a little bit, MSFT, but I just wanted to point out the nearly 2% that it rose today is a new all-time high. So,
there you go.
benefiting, also, helping lift the rest of the tech sector.
We just
looking pretty
mentioned,
good
sorry
today.
to interrupt. We just mentioned DraftKings. I just pulled up the Bloomberg quote, up 236% year to date.
Yeah.
That's the clear winner there. So, okay, I got it. All right, Microsoft.
Yep. So the other thing that we're looking at, there's sort of a string of biotech names. This sector is always super volatile, that are all over the place today. So the first one, NanoString Technologies, and STG is down 50%, nearly 50%. A lot of bad news here. On Friday, the company lost a U.S. patent infringement case against 10x Genomics, and then it withdrew its full year 2023 guidance. Today, had a downgrade from TD Cowen. It's just looking really, it's not looking super visible what's going to happen with the company from here, they say. So that's down to the lowest ever. Other movers, Anavex Life Sciences is up 12%. That biotech said it had initiated a regulatory submission of an Alzheimer's treatment to the European Medicines Agency. And the other two that I'm looking at today, so 2seventy Bio, ticker TSBT, is down about 14% after saying the FDA will convene an advisory committee to review data around applications for a cancer drug that it's done with Bristol Myers Squibb, which is down about 2%. A decision on that application won't be made until December 16th. So both of those shares of those companies ticking lower today on a little bit of uncertainty there around that drug.
Hey, Carmen Reineke, thank you so much. We appreciate that, getting the update. Carmen Reineke, she covers the equity markets for Bloomberg News, joining us in here. Again, the S&P's up about 0.4%. All right, this open AI...
Driven by Microsoft, right? They're the leader in point additions on the indexes right now.
I'm assuming you have the move function up in your...
I don't have it up, but I had looked at it earlier. So,
okay, so
and they were, and obviously... NVIDIA is another one that Carmen will be talking to us about probably tomorrow because they have earnings.
They have earnings, that's right. So, all right. So I get on the train at 5:30 this morning down at the Jersey Shore. I need to get super smart on this open AI story because, quite frankly, I had better stuff to do over the weekend. But Max Chafkin and Rachel Metz wrote the definitive thing on Bloomberg, and that
I will say I don't know what I had to do over the weekend, but I was reading Max and Rachel and Ed and our whole team, like every 30 minutes there was like a new story.
Exactly.
And did you get, Max is in here in the studio with us, did you get any sleep at all?
I slept, but we were all working a lot, and especially people who were chasing news, I don't think slept very much. I mean, it was like Succession. We had, an ousted founder, and then this kind of chaotic effort to try to reverse the coup, which seems to have sort of partly succeeded in the sense that Microsoft has now hired Sam Altman.
So just kind of frame out where we are like right now. I know it's changing literally as we speak.
Well, and let's not lose sight of the reason this all started. There was a worry, long simmering, I guess, within OpenAI that eventually AI could kill us all. But I think over the course of the weekend, we realized we care so much more about money than the ultimate demise of civilization that,
well,
it doesn't matter.
I don't think we should conclude that the people who were brushing off those concerns aren't worried about the end of civilization. I think there's sort of a disagreement over just how serious those concerns are and how immediate they are, and whether, whether like having an AI chatbot inside of Microsoft Word is going to lead to the end of the world. Microsoft, I would say, would argue no. There are some people who are, close to OpenAI and had a lot of influence at OpenAI who actually worry about those things. And, for many years, really, OpenAI talked about these kind of apocalyptic scenarios. And I think kind of behind the scenes, there's a sort of a question over, was that marketing or was that in earnest? And there are certainly people, inside the company who saw that as real. And those tensions, basically bubbled to a head on Friday. All of a sudden, very crazy transition where the OpenAI board puts out a press release essentially saying that Sam Altman, who we should say is like pretty much the most famous, most beloved founder in Silicon Valley, had been dishonest with them. No transition planning at all. And that kicked off this chaotic situation where you had investors attempting to pressure the board to bring him back. And that ended last night and into this morning with the hiring of a new CEO, Emmett Shear, who was the CEO of Twitch, the live streaming thing, sort of a contemporary of Sam Altman's, and Sam Altman getting hired by Microsoft to operate some sort of AI project within the software company.
By the way, the interim CEO, she had her job for like 48 hours, right? First, she said she was so honored to receive the position, and then she said she's going to go to Microsoft.
Well, and, I do think that there's a lot of external pressure being put on both the board and these executives. We saw even the leader of this coup, or the person who sort of kicked off the coup, the chief scientist, signed the letter, threatening to resign. It looks like he may, in fact, join the breakaway effort. So it's been really chaotic, and I think we should say what caused this was this crazy structure. You had a nonprofit entity controlling this $86 billion valuation company. Microsoft totally dependent on OpenAI, but with no actual operational leverage, no board seats, no way to actually influence the company. And that's why we're seeing this kind of weird influence play where people are taking to social media and trying to influence the state of play because they don't actually have board seats or any kind of control.
Well, now they're just going to have the entire personnel. So, by the way, I was worried about when I read the first stories on Friday, AI destroying civilization, because I thought, Ilya Sutskever is one of the smartest people in the world, and he's worried about it, then I'm worried about it. Now he looks like one of the dumbest people at OpenAI, so I'm no longer worried about that. I mean, this guy is a hot mess. Am I wrong?
Well, there's a temptation to ask, how dangerous is this if the guys running it can't seem to sort of, organize a proper boardroom coup? Like, that seems like if you can't do that, it's going to be hard to extinguish humanity.
He's the one who got Altman on the Zoom call or the Microsoft Teams meeting and fired him on Friday, and now he's regretting it and lamenting it on Twitter and signing a letter saying he's going to leave OpenAI with the rest of the employees.
That's why you have professional management for these tech companies.
As I said, lots of external pressure being placed on everybody. So who knows? I mean, who knows what caused him to pull back, but we had outside investors threatening to write down their investment, the possibility of Microsoft somehow using whatever leverage it can. So, there are a lot of reasons for people to feel
they've hired Sam Altman.
Yeah, but okay, so they should hire Robert Altman. And let's say they get some of the 500 other tech folks there. What they don't have is the intellectual property of OpenAI. So what, in fact, are they getting?
And not just the intellectual property, but the brand. I mean, I think it's very easy to think, oh, well, all these guys could just go inside of Microsoft and rebuild it. They probably can, but that's going to take some time. And I think, from the point of view of a Microsoft investor, you look at this, you say, okay, we have a hedge at least. If this OpenAI relationship falls apart,
that's a good way to think about
then we've got Sam Altman, we've got a lot of the leadership team. Our corporate strategy is not, in trouble. That said, OpenAI has the strongest brand by far. These, hundreds of millions of people who are going to OpenAI, asking it questions, they're not going to instantly switch to to Bing Chat or whatever. And the small companies, a lot of these companies that are using the OpenAI APIs, the tech stack that allows them to build on top of it, they have relationships with OpenAI. It's going to be expensive, potentially, to switch over to some other provider. So there are a lot of things that are going to...
They're thinking about that already, Max.
They absolutely are, but they're not going to do it for nothing.
As I know from reading your story.
And so there is a risk here, you know, from the point of view of Microsoft and OpenAI, that they end up kind of like splitting the customer base, and that, you know, Facebook, which has a competing product, you know, somehow is able to build a bit of momentum. I mean, this is a very, very hot industry, but it's also, because of that, a very competitive industry.
Once again, just coming from the grizzled Wall Street veteran, this is an embarrassment for Silicon Valley. I mean, an embarrassment beyond the pale. How they could think that a structure like this, a lack of governance like this, is appropriate for a candy store, much less a complete new technology.
And by the way, I thought your story was brilliant. I'll say again, because I read everything, and I got the most, I think, from yours. So that's why you get the green bee. But the structure seemed to be trying to put guardrails on it, and what they failed to understand is that we care more about making money than anything else.
Well, and there are points of leverage that have nothing to do with the structure, and it has to do with Microsoft, which OpenAI needed Microsoft, continues to need Microsoft. They run like most of the servers, maybe even all of the servers that OpenAI is dependent on. OpenAI is not a money-making endeavor yet. I mean, it generates a lot of revenue. They're dependent on capital from Microsoft, $13 billion
Servers,
so far. So you know, and what you basically had is kind of like these commercial imperatives overstepping this kind of slightly rickety nonprofit structure that back in 2005 they built, and then you had all, you know, as I said, pressure coming from all different directions. We haven't even talked about Elon Musk, who's out there sort of cheering on the coup, saying, you know, this was great, you know, because of course Elon Musk was part of the nonprofit and had long been a critic of OpenAI and has his own competing company. So yeah,
he was a critic until he realized he could be cashing in, and then he was like, screw civilization, I'm going to cash in.
Right, and again, and if you're a critic, if you're somebody who's actually worried about these risks, maybe you're not worried about the apocalyptic risk, but you're worried about, you know, things like cybercrime, things like these are powerful pieces of software that are going to run big parts of our lives.
Racial bias.
Yeah, racial bias, of course, so meanwhile, no one's looking at that. So it really seems like just general chaos.
You know what's an interesting thing? Bailey Lipschultz pointed out, he's reading the Walter Isaacson Steve Jobs book coincidentally right now. And he said, you know, it's very similar to what Jobs went through, except for the fact that because there wasn't social media and like Twitter, that took years, whereas this is happening in hours.
Yeah, exactly. It's the Steve Jobs arc, but played out, as you said, over a weekend.
All right, Max, great stuff. Thanks so much for joining us. Max Chafkin, columnist, Bloomberg Business Week. I highly recommend heading on Bloomberg.com or the terminal.
And by the way, Business Week has been writing about this stuff in a smart way for a long time, because the dangers of AI, not the apocalyptic dangers, as Max points out, but the more imminent dangers is something that we've covered a lot in Business Week.
We have. So check it out, Bloomberg.com and on the terminal. We're going to have more coming up. This is Bloomberg. Let's get some company news right now with Lisa Mateo.
Thanks, Paul. Bayer suffered its biggest drop ever, losing about $8.3 billion in market value. And the German pharma and agriculture company recently lost a key U.S. trial against its weed killer Roundup. But it also halted a main study at its top experimental medicine due to a lack of efficacy. Bloomberg's Katie Greifeld says that's bad news for Bristol-Myers Squibb, too.
It has a similar experimental drug for treating atrial fibrillation, and there's a lot of investor focus around this specific issue because you think if successful, obviously this could address a huge market, generate huge sales.
Bristol-Myers down about 2%, and we have Bayer down about 17%. NVIDIA and Alphabet are partnering together to help develop technology to find new materials for medicine. Bloomberg's Abigail Doolittle has more on Sandbox AQ.
It helps companies simulate large volumes of chemical reactions to develop new materials for medicine and, interestingly enough, batteries. Now, the startup will help expand the capabilities of NVIDIA's software platform for developing AI applications to better simulate quantum mechanics behind chemical, biological, and material science. It's valued at about $4 billion.
Now, the news comes just ahead of NVIDIA opening its books tomorrow. Right now, NVIDIA up nearly 1%, Alphabet up just a fraction. And in other news, McDonald's has agreed to buy Carlyle Group's minority stake in the partnership that runs the restaurant chain's business in China, Hong Kong, and Macau for an undisclosed price. As part of the deal, the company will increase its stake in the partnership from 20% to 48%. We have McDonald's up a fraction, Carlyle Group up 1%. I'm Lisa Mateo. This is Bloomberg.
Markets, headlines, and breaking news 24 hours a day at Bloomberg.com, on Bloomberg Television, and the Bloomberg Business app. This is a Bloomberg Business Flash.
And I'm John Tucker in the Bloomberg Newsroom with this Bloomberg Business Flash. And right now, green on the screen, all the major averages are higher after hiring ousted OpenAI chief Sam Altman. Microsoft helping lift the major averages up 1.4%. Right now, the S&P 500, 18 points higher. That's up 0.4%. 45.32 on the index. The Dow Jones Industrial Average up 87 points. That's up 0.25%. The NASDAQ 100, 110 points higher. That is up 0.7% right now. And let's do a Bitcoin quote for you. That is up 1% at 37,393. Fidelity International CEO Ann Richards unexpectedly stepping down after 5 years, leaving the asset manager without an immediate replacement, and we don't know why. Meantime, workers at Wells Fargo branches in New Mexico and Alaska, they have filed for the first ever union elections at a major U.S. bank. And also, earnings season not over yet. We're still waiting for NVIDIA's quarterly results. They could still exceed sky-high investor expectations. And we check the markets for you all day long, right here on Bloomberg Radio. I'm John Tucker. That's your Bloomberg.
Wait, are we going to get your take on the possibility of a union at a big bank, Paul?
Like the tellers and, yeah.
I was a teller back in the day.
Were you really?
I used to walk across the street with $285,000 in cash in Trenton, New Jersey, to go to the little thing where the drive-thru was a separate building. Thursday afternoons, $285,000 cash. They let me walk, no security, nothing.
Did you ever think about making a run for it?
It's just...
No, that would have been too simple. You like call a friend, say, "Hey, pretend to rob me."
Yeah,
that's more like.
You could have made a run for it and then bought Bitcoin, and you would be a super gazillionaire by now, because I imagine that was a while back when you were working. Okay, so Bitcoin wasn't around for another 20 or 30 years. Anyway,
always balanced my book. I was never long or short. Boom.
We're proud.
Would you have unionized?
Damn right.
Would you have?
I was robbed. We were robbed.
Oh, no kidding.
Yeah. And then
wow.
dude fires a shot on his way out. So now he discharged his weapon. So his crime went up from like 15 years to like life. runs out of the bank, turns right. What is just next door to our bank? Eddie's Donuts.
So
half the Trenton police force was in there, and the guy runs out.
That's a good story.
What a poor sucker. All right, let's move on to talk a little bit about crypto, the possibility of an ETF. I mean, BitDog could be traded by the big dogs at BlackRock. We have Matt Siegel in here. He is the head of, I guess, crypto analysis over at Van Eck. What's your official title at Van Eck? Head of Digital Assets Research.
You got it.
I was pretty close. And, I mean, before we get into anything else, when are we going to see these ETFs finally allowed by the SEC? Because it doesn't even feel like Gary Gensler's dragging his feet anymore. It's like he's grasped on to a chair and people are trying to pull him. What's the deal?
The final deadline for approval of a number of these spot Bitcoin ETFs is the first half of January. So there's a lot of logistics that has to go on behind the scenes at the SEC with various divisions talking to each other and communicating with issuers to button up all
But it's
these
going to
applications.
happen.
Very high percentage by the first half of January next year.
So what does that mean for the market? I mean, even beyond Bitcoin, Bitcoin itself is trading above $37,000, which to me is just absolutely nuts because I started covering this kind of as a joke in 2012 and it was like, $90. So the fact that that same string of code could be worth $37,000 is nuts to me. But a lot of people still look at this as kind of a failed experiment, which baffles the mind.
Well, let's start with the impact of the ETF. When an investor buys Bitcoin on Coinbase, a retail investor, they're paying an average of 2.5% in transaction fees. When an ETF buyer buys a Bitcoin ETF in Europe, where these spot products trade, they're paying 10 to 20 basis points in spreads, and commissions and fees are often zero. So what we have is an order of magnitude decline in costs for the end user. And essentially, you're mainlining a Bitcoin-only exchange into the brokerage account of every investor in the U.S.
Can you arbitrage that, by the way, as a trader?
Well, that's why there's a functioning futures market, and the CME's market share of that futures market has recently reached an all-time high. So it is the regulated flows. Bitcoin ETFs have seen $1 billion in flows in the last month. That's 80% of the total year-to-date that we've seen. So the flows are coming from the regulated side. Bitcoin's up 30% in the last month. Yep. When it's one-way buying in an illiquid asset like this, the price impact can be large.
All right. There was an election in Argentina. Please explain to me why this has a connection to Bitcoin.
Pretty shock result as well. I mean,
Well,
a guy who looks like Elvis
Javier-
and lives with like his mom and 6 dogs won.
How do you pronounce his last name?
Milei.
Milei. Okay, Milei.
Javier Milei is a libertarian who has been very vocal about his desire to eliminate the central bank of Argentina. Argentina has the worst performing currency in Latin America in the last 3 decades. It's had the most number of recessions. It has the least amount of foreign direct investment. So sticking with the same path is kind of the definition of insanity, keeping the same thing going and expecting something to change. This new leader has plans to dollarize the economy. He has been very outspoken about his belief that central banks are a scam that impose an inflationary tax on regular citizens. And he's also been very outspoken in his admiration for Bitcoin in restoring money to and value to its original creator, which is the private sector. So we've been observing for some time that crypto adoption in Argentina, both Bitcoin and stablecoins, is the highest in Latin America and the highest among the highest in the region.
As a hedge against that inflation you were talking about?
Yeah. Okay. Folks are holding Tether in order to maintain dollar purchasing power. The other thing we've noticed, the largest private oil and gas company in Argentina just announced plans to mine Bitcoin with the excess gas and methane that's a byproduct of their existing production. So it's very rational, we think, for countries to use their stranded energy, monetize it to earn Bitcoin, and in the process give their citizens a hedge on the fiat-imposed inflationary tax that Milei has spoken so much about.
By the way, I'm not an official libertarian. Like, I'm
You
not
just dress like
officially
one.
anything.
Okay.
Especially in a day and age when you only vote against someone and not for anybody
Gotcha,
anymore.
okay.
But aren't the founding fathers, like, isn't this country kind of libertarian?
Right.
Wasn't that
I'm
the
with
point
you.
of
I'm with
America?
you. Exactly. And you're in the great state of Ohio. That's where you're from, so it's ground zero there.
So Matt, what's your take on the rest of the 20,000 other coins? I mean, Bitcoin is something we could talk about all day, and I think, even Gary Gensler doesn't think Bitcoin is a security, but everything else has a question mark. Are there like 10 that you like and the rest are junk? Are there 100 that you like and the rest are junk? How does the whole thing look to you?
We think the vast majority of the value in this ecosystem is going to accrue to a handful of protocols and thus tokens. And it's very early stages in those days, and there's still a lot of regulatory uncertainty. So just focusing on Bitcoin, because of the huge number of catalysts for next year, including the lack of supply. More than 70% of Bitcoin supply has not moved in the last year. That is an all-time high. The Bitcoin halving, which is an algorithm change, occurs next April. That will cut the amount of Bitcoin by half that is generated. We're in the middle of an absolute boom in Bitcoin fees. So transaction fees on the Bitcoin blockchain are now 15% of all Bitcoin miner revenues, which is an all-time high. That's been turbocharged by these NFTs on Bitcoin. And with the ETF coming and the institutional adoption via state-affiliated actors, right? So my call is that Argentina will become the 5th country in the world to mine Bitcoin for its own state reserves, joining El Salvador, Bhutan, Oman, and the UAE. And with that regulatory certainty and the existence of the ETF and the U.S. government and G7's continued overspending, debt, and deficit problems, that there'll be large institutional buyers that will migrate to Bitcoin. The history is that the rest of the coins benefit from that, but that usually happens after the halving, which is next April.
All right, so while we have you here, tell us what your thought is on WorldCoin. Because we've been talking about Sam Altman all day in regards to his position at OpenAI or now Microsoft, but he started this like biometric cryptocurrency. I don't know how it works, like measures your eye and keeps the data. But what's the story with that? It's a layer 2 Ethereum-based coin. So
you can see from the regulation being passed in the UK and in Canada around what can be said on internet platforms, that there's a huge desire to differentiate the humans from the bots, right? Presidential candidate Nikki Haley was in the media last week saying that everyone needs to be verified in order to participate on social media. I doubt that's going to happen in the US, but if it were, and we wanted to preserve some user privacy, then a cryptographic network that can verify user identity without revealing the name would be an attractive product. And that's essentially what WorldCoin is trying to do. So we do think that over the next year, there's going to be some innovation that allows AI to be differentiated, whether it's generated by a human or by a bot, and that crypto has a role to play in preserving privacy while enabling those functions.
That's cool.
Matt Siegel, thank you so much for joining us. Matt Siegel, he's the head of digital assets research for Van Eck, joining us live here in our Bloomberg Interactive Broker Studio. And John Tucker's going to come up, prepare a executive summary of what we discussed in this segment, so everybody's on this.
He's been taking the minutes.
Exactly right. He's going to come back and let us know.
You heard of the Fed minutes?
All right, let's head down to Washington, D.C. Amy Marshall's got world and national news.
All right, thank you, Paul. Israel says it has more proof the Gaza hospital at the center of its military operations in the enclave was used by Hamas as a command center. Israeli forces engaged in heavy fighting with Hamas in the northern Gaza Strip overnight, as the U.S. says it is still optimistic about a deal to free hostages held by the militant group. Israeli government spokesman Elon Levy on the progress in getting those hostages free.
Israeli society is, of course, sick with worry for the fate of our 240 hostages, including 30 children. I really do mean sick with worry. People aren't sleeping properly. We're doing everything we can to bring them home. You'll understand that I can't comment on sensitive negotiations that are ongoing because human lives hang in the balance. We hope to bring these people home, but the less we say, the better at this point.
Israeli government spokesman Elon Levy. Age is a focus as President Biden celebrates his 81st birthday. An NBC News survey put Biden's approval rating at 40%. That's its lowest level yet, and it shows former President Trump leading Biden in a hypothetical matchup, 46 to 44%. We get more with Bloomberg's Anne-Marie Hordern.
One note about his birthday, I would say, in our poll, we have this open-ended question. You can write in what you think about candidates. And by and large, we have respondents continuing to write in that Biden is just too old.
It's Bloomberg's Anne-Marie Hordern. Now, tomorrow and Wednesday are expected to be among the busiest holiday travel days of the year. Transportation Secretary Pete Buttigieg says airports have been told to prioritize commercial flights, further lowering the chance of a delay.
In other words, you won't have to wait on somebody who just hopped on a private jet for a golf trip, cutting in line ahead of your passenger aircraft. Your flight to go see your family will be the priority.
Secretary Buttigieg says tens of millions of people are expected to pass through airports. Global news 24 hours a day, whenever you want it with Bloomberg News Now. I'm Amy Morris. This is Bloomberg.
Profits, headlines and breaking news 24 hours a day at Bloomberg.com, on Bloomberg Television, and the Bloomberg Business app. This is a Bloomberg Business Flash.
And I'm John Tucker in the Bloomberg Newsroom with this Bloomberg Business Flash. Stocks continue their climb, extending the market upturn at the start of a holiday-shortened week as Microsoft shares rise after hired ousted OpenAI co-founder Sam Altman. The U.S. indexes, they've been in rally mode since late October as markets have become more optimistic we can avoid recession and that the Fed is likely to cut rates next year. But Citigroup economist Andrew Hollenhorst says the path ahead for the Fed is not so clear-cut.
We have jobless claims that are coming up a little bit. That looks like something that could be consistent with a soft landing. But are you going to get some data that starts going in different directions? Probably. And this is probably going to become a lot more difficult for the Fed.
Right now, the S&P 500 up 20 points. That's up 0.5%, 45.34 on the index. The Dow Jones Industrial Average up 107 points. That is up 0.3%. The NASDAQ 100, 120 points higher. That is up 0.75% right now. And Microsoft shares, they are up right now 1.8%. As far as yields, the 2-year again, that's up 2 basis points at 491. The lending arm of Toyota is going to pay $60 million. They're trying to settle allegations by regulators in the U.S. They misled customers into buying extra products that boosted their payments and then gave them a runaround when customers tried to cancel. Markets will close early on Friday, by the way, for your planning purposes. Black Friday, the unofficial start of the holiday shopping season.
What time do they close Friday?
I am guessing equities. I'm guessing the bond market's going to be off.
Yeah.
And that equities
Yeah,
will close.
the bond market is closed because they're smart.
Yep.
And the equity
They
market...
take off for Arbor Day.
Well, they should. Dude, there's no reason to keep everybody at work on a day when no one's going to be at work. Like, who stays and works on a Friday?
Me.
After Thanksgiving?
I'm here.
Me.
Paul's here.
Okay, well,
Shanali's here.
newsflash, your listenership is going to shrink to almost nothing.
Really?
So say whatever you want on Friday.
Well, you know why I'm on Friday? Because I get to work with Carol Masser. That's why I'm coming.
Nice.
That's a nice
So
trade.
Carol has to work on the bridge day? Why doesn't she just take it off? I don't understand. I talked to the leadership of the New York Stock Exchange about this for years.
You have. And and they actually
their whole thing is
days.
Exactly.
Right.
They don't want to have the market closed for more than 3 days, and they're willing to do anything to avoid that. But there's no good reason.
Well, you don't want it. I mean, in a time when you
in
can
other
trade
countries, markets
24/7.
closed for 4 days.
All right, very good. Shanali Bassick joins us here, and she does all the Wall Street stuff for us. And there's some news out there on the Wall Street front here. Citi, my former firm, cutting 300 now senior manager roles. That's what I don't know is. Shanali Bassick joins us here. Shanali, what is a senior manager?
I think Citigroup is asking the same thing. So, they're looking across their entire bank and saying, we have too many levels of management.
Okay.
We have too many people in this bureaucratic structure that is disallowing for them to be lean, nimble, and profitable more than they are today. So what are they doing? We saw her really, Jane Fraser, the CEO, really take to the first couple levels of the bank, really reshape the management teams there, eliminate levels of management, and now she's looking a couple of levels below, 2 levels below her executive management team. There are 300 senior managers being cut and part of that and below. But remember, this is really just the tip of the iceberg. It's about 10% of the workers at that level being cut. This is, again, a couple levels below the executive team. But you have to now think about a cascading effect across the bank, all the levels of management across the entire globe, plus folks that do work in back office and technology roles as well.
All right, so when I think of Citi, I mean, 240,000 employees, they're all over the world, literally every corner of the world, trading every security there is. What's the feeling on Wall Street
Even
from
munis?
investors? Sure.
Aren't they considering
They're
shutting
thinking
their
about
muni?
it, but they're going to reconsider. I mean, what's the call on Wall Street? Because the stock does nothing. Is it just that they're too big, or that they just haven't articulated and then I guess, executed a strategy. I don't know.
A lot of firms, I would say, despite just Citigroup, are making these calculations. It's not about just being too big. It's about being too bulky, too bureaucratic. And so when you look at the changes that she's making, frankly, the day since she announced the initial set of changes, the stock is up another 9%. And that's because there was this general understanding here that Citigroup was too sprawling to begin with.
Yep.
Now, remember, you have to think even just back to how Citi was really created through a series of mergers. There was a point at which it was called the financial supermarket because they just offered so many things. So when you look at how Jane Fraser is exiting some of the businesses across the world that are not as profitable as she'd like them to be, these are the changes that are leading to, say, let's say, Citi 2.0, which she envisions to be a simpler bank that wins on wealth management, treasury services, and basically the business of moving money around the world for these corporate clients, investment banking and trading.
I wonder if she could get away with this, just saying, hey, we have a return criteria, and if a business line doesn't hit that return criteria on a rolling 3 or 5 year basis, it's out. I don't care who it is. If it's trading FX, which is the core to who we are, it's out. Investment banking, out. I wonder, that would be a clear, we're going to set a threshold, and if this business line doesn't meet our return criteria, we're getting out of it. But they're in so many businesses, I'm not sure they can say that.
No, I think that's getting simpler to say as she simplifies the bank. She can say to you, listen, we have 3 major investment banking lines, and this is what I want each of you to be making in the next 5 years. Now, listen, they're doing a lot of cleanup work. Even the investment bank, they have an interim head. They don't even have a full head of the entire banking division yet. And so until that person gets into its spot, then how do you do that? Remember, Citigroup is the second largest headcount on Wall Street next to JP Morgan. And so if you think about it, if they cut tens of thousands of jobs, they would be closer in line to the same headcount as Wells Fargo and Bank of America.
All right. I learned about Ken Griffin's views on JP Morgan as the most important Wall Street bank in the world, or most important bank in the world.
He was kind of wrong, actually. He said it's the most important bank in the world, but the banks in China are actually larger by asset size.
Which is what you said, yeah.
Yeah, and I said in America.
Exactly.
And so people.
Did you see that interview, Paul?
I did.
Great job.
What a way to end
I thought
the
it was
year.
I didn't know it was going to be so long. I thought it was just a quick 7-minute hit.
I was shocked that he gave me an hour, to be honest with you.
I mean, it was amazing, and I got so much out of it. So thank you for doing that.
I'm still tired
I also
from it.
thought he's a difficult interview.
Yeah.
Because a lot of times he'll just pause. And you don't know if you're supposed to pick up, right? Plus, he also asks you questions a lot.
All the time. He asked me like 3 different questions. I'm like, dude, I'm the reporter here.
Yeah. All right, so Citi, they're doing their thing. Morgan Stanley, the wealth business, that's the big business for them. That's been their focus over the last decade plus with their CEO.
I'm excited about this story.
Yeah, they got some new management
This
there,
is
right?
why, because I know all of them. So
good.
why I'm excited to talk about this story. They really chose people within the bank that have been there a long time. Jed Finn, for example, who'll be running wealth management under Andy Saperstein. Jed has, I've met him dozens of times under Andy. He was kind of the guy that has been executing on a lot of their growth initiatives. They integrated this thing called Solium that gets them to work closer with employers and employee stock plans, gives you an in to not just the CEO of a company, but all of the people that work under them, and then they make those people wealth management clients as well. And then on the other side of things, in the asset manager, you have Jacques Chapuis and Ben Haneke taking taking over to run the asset manager. Listen, inside of Morgan Stanley, there was a lot of scuttle about what Andy Saperstein, who now runs asset and wealth, would do. These are now his deputies. This is the next generation of Morgan Stanley taking shape once again. They come in the asset manager with a very strong alternatives expertise. That is a shot across the bow to Goldman Sachs, which is also growing up its alternatives business within their asset manager. And so I'm excited to see these guys sharpen their pencils and get competitive and see what they do to win against the rest of the street.
And just seeing in some of the reporting from Sri here and Natarajan on this Bloomberg news story. So this guy, Jed Finn, who's taking over that wealth business, and his boss is Saperstein, and the CEO, James Gorman, all McKinsey executives. So
this consulting thing,
Yeah.
consultants versus investment bankers, by Morgan Stanley stock price today, these days, the consultants are winning.
Right. All right. Very good. Good stuff here. Anything else we need to know? We got 20 seconds.
I will say, in a surveillance correction, I was alerted by a listener that the bond market will be open Friday morning.
Oh, okay.
It's only closed. It's only a half day on Friday.
But
for the
neither
bond
Matt
traders.
or I will be here.
Yes. We'll be here. Shonali Bassick, thank you so much for joining us. We're going to have more coming up. This is Bloomberg. Let's get some company news right now with Lisa Mateo.
Thanks, Paul. Shares of Microsoft, they are higher. They're up nearly 1.5%. And this after the company announced it hired ousted OpenAI chief Sam Altman and former OpenAI president Greg Brockman to lead a new AI development team. We get more on what this means for Microsoft with Bloomberg's Tom McKenzie.
They continue to have their investment in OpenAI. We'll watch if that holds on the back of this. And now they have Altman and Brockman within Microsoft building out this new AI research team. Of course, Alphabet, Google, they have DeepMind, and that's very much, of course, embedded within the Google infrastructure. And that's done huge progress and has made huge progress over the last decade. This is an opportunity for Microsoft arguably to close the gap on that front while still having exposure to OpenAI and all of their corporate clients.
But if OpenAI workers had their way, Sam Altman would be back on the job. And they're taking action. Bloomberg's Ed Ludlow has that story.
Around 2/3 of the remaining OpenAI staff have signed a letter to the board, which we at Bloomberg have just reviewed. And they're saying to the board that they need to reflect on how they've acted. And almost 500 of those employees are threatening to resign and walk away if the board doesn't engage with them.
We also have some management changes at Fidelity International. CEO Ann Richards is stepping down after 5 years leading the asset manager. According to a statement, Richards will stay with the company as a vice chair to help Fidelity with its external relationships and also its strategic partnerships. Now, a spokesperson did not give a reason for Richards' decision to leave and also did not name a successor or even give a time frame for that handoff. Those are the company stories we're following this hour. Stay tuned. We have more Bloomberg Markets coming up in just a bit. I'm Lisa Mateo, and this is Bloomberg.
This is Bloomberg Markets with Paul Sweeney and Matt Miller on Bloomberg Radio.
All right, looking at these markets right here, we've got green on the screen here. S&P 500 up 0.4%. The Nasdaq up 0.75% here. So kind of lengthening out some of these gains here. On the yield front, slightly higher yields. 10-year Treasury up a couple of basis points, 4.45%. WTI crude oil up 2.6%, just under $78 a barrel. Bitcoin, it is higher, up 0.8%, 37,300. Right now, let's head down to Washington, D.C. We'll get world and national news with Amy Morris.
Thank you, Paul. A federal appeals court in Washington is hearing oral arguments today about whether a gag order issued against Donald Trump can be lifted. A 3-judge federal panel, including Patricia Millett, pressed Trump attorney Dean Sauer over his refusal to say whether a defendant's speech can be regulated.
It seems incumbent upon you to be able to explain to me what a court could do to protect the integrity of criminal proceedings that isn't already covered by a don't violate the law.
The trial judge overseeing Trump's 2020 election subversion case issued that gag order last month. Social media companies are facing new pressure to answer for their platform's impact on kids. Bloomberg's Nathan Hager has more.
The Senate Judiciary Committee has now issued subpoenas to the CEO of Discord, Jason Citron, Snap CEO Evan Spiegel, and ex-chief executive Linda Yaccarino. They're demanding all three testify at a hearing on December 6th on online child sexual exploitation. The committee says U.S. Marshals have had to serve the subpoenas to Discord and X because they've refused to cooperate. The panel says it's in discussions with Meta CEO Mark Zuckerberg and TikTok's Shou-Zi Chu to testify voluntarily. In Washington, I'm Nathan Hager, Bloomberg Radio.
The University of Virginia delaying the release of a report about a shooting that left 3 student athletes dead last year. The university announced that it will now hold the release of the report until after the trial in the suspect of the shooting. Christopher Darnell Jones Jr. has been charged with multiple counts of aggravated murder and aggravated malicious wounding. This holiday season is expected to bring some of the busiest travel days in U.S. history. Transportation Secretary Pete Buttigieg says his department is preparing for bad weather that could significantly impact travel this week. Global news 24 hours a day and whenever you want it with Bloomberg News Now. I'm Amy Morris, and this is Bloomberg. Paul and Matt.
All right, Amy Morris, thank you so much. We appreciate that. Matt, there's an interesting story on Bloomberg Business Week written by Dina Schenker. People on weight loss drugs are less fixated on the turkey and trimmings, and this could mean trouble for food companies as we come into the Thanksgiving holiday. You know, I don't know. And I guess in the story they highlight this family in Houston. The Houston area retailer, she's been taking the medication, the appetite-suppressing medication Mounjaro for 1.5 years, following 15 months on Ozempic. She has lost 115 pounds, this woman in the story, after years of struggles with dieting and diet-related disease. Her son, who's 17, has lost 65 pounds on Ozempic, and her 21-year-old daughter has lost 50 on it. So when they sit down,
and they look great. By the way, we have a picture of them in the story. They look fantastic. She's a realtor.
Yep, she's a realtor. Yep, with an O.
And I obviously read this story start to finish as soon as it hit the wire because, I heard Tom Keene talking this morning about pumpkin pie on Surveillance, right? And he was saying every slice is like over 500 calories, and if you're like him, or like me, you'll put a ton of whipped cream on it too. So you're getting to like 800 a slice. And then, when you're watching football and sipping Drambuie or whatever, you'll have like 3 or 4 slices. So you're doing like 2,000 to 3,000 calories in pumpkin pie alone on Thanksgiving. And I will definitely do that. All I'm thinking about already a week out is the pumpkin pie. So I'm hoping at some point to get a shot of Ozempic so I can think less about that and just have a little bit of turkey. By the way, John Farrell also made an interesting comment in that he thinks the U.S. economy is kind of built on, or at least tilted towards, obesity, right? More than a third of the people in this country are obese.
Right.
And if we have all of a sudden a wonder drug, he's not one of them. If we all of a sudden have a wonder drug that can turn that around, that has a lot of questions for like Krispy Kreme, right?
Exactly. And so what are people going to be doing on this Thanksgiving, those folks that are on those drugs? We'll see. That's a good story. This is Bloomberg.
This is Bloomberg Markets with Paul Sweeney and Matt Miller.
Why were the economists so wrong? What are the economists getting wrong?
Isn't this a slam dunk time to buy U.S. Treasuries?
Soft landing, hard landing, no landing. I don't know.
True. What the heck does that mean?
I don't know.
Breaking market news and insight from Bloomberg experts.
We're going to be in an environment with higher rates for longer.
The 5-day in-office work week is effectively dead.
It's definitely a good sign that we're not ready to land this economy just yet.
This is Bloomberg Markets with Paul Sweeney and Matt Miller on Bloomberg Radio.
All right, coming up in this hour, we're going to get the latest on that OpenAI. Ashley Vance, reporter with Bloomberg Business Week, joins to discuss the Sam Altman and OpenAI. Maybe we'll throw in a little Elon Musk in there as well. C-suite conversation, Ali Ben El Madani. He's the CEO at ABL Aviation. So he's the guy like buys planes and leases planes. And all
Exactly.
That kind of stuff?
Yeah.
Okay.
His company owns a bunch of planes. They lease them out. They're in really high demand right now.
Okay.
So on
All
the
right.
one hand, I would guess he's making big margins. On the other hand, it's probably tough to get new metal.
Get stuff? Yeah, exactly. All right, he'll be in studio. That'll be cool. And then Tim Pagliara, CIO at CapWealth, will join us to talk about his stock picks in this market. We're going to kick things off like we do in this hour with Charlie Pellet.
Hi, thank you very much. We're looking at the best level of the day right now on the S&P, up 18 points, 45.32. That is a gain right now of about 0.4%. Dow Industrials up 114, up 0.3%. The NASDAQ Composite Index up 102, higher now by 0.7%. We've got the 10-year 4.45%. Spot gold down $6 the ounce to $19.74, lower by 0.3%. While West Texas Intermediate crude now with a 78 handle, up $2.11. That is a gain of about 2.8%. So gains in equities are driving the S&P 500 toward its highest since August, while putting the tech-heavy NASDAQ 100 on pace for a 22-month high. But what about the economic environment, specifically inflation, and what could that mean for the equity market? Ash Alankar is global head of asset allocation at Janus Henderson, and he was interviewed this morning on Surveillance.
Inflation going forward will likely settle at a much higher level going forward, which benefits obviously lower PE value stocks. And we actually see this starting to play out already. If you look through the lens of the option market, you see greater attractiveness in the equity risk premium to non-U.S. equities.
And you can hear more of that conversation on the Surveillance podcast. You can download it wherever you get your podcasts. Well, as the earnings season winds down, investors will be on the lookout for results from a handful of retailers and tech companies. NVIDIA's quarterly results tomorrow after the close of trading could still exceed sky-high investor expectations thanks to strong demand for generative artificial intelligence. NVIDIA shares up now by 1.1%. Again, recapping, stocks are higher with the S&P up now by 0.4%. I'm Charlie Pellet, and that is a Bloomberg Business Flash.
All right, Charlie Pella, thank you so much. We appreciate it. Matt Miller, Paul Sweeney live here in our Bloomberg Interactive Broker Studio, and we are streaming on YouTube as well. We're also on that. You know, we're in your dashboard now with all the apps.
That's
Apple
right.
CarPlay.
I love
Android.
that.
Yep.
I've been using it ever since Colin showed it to me. I downloaded the Bloomberg Business app. That's the white app on my iPhone. And now when I get in the car, I see like Google Maps, I see Waze, and I see Bloomberg Business on my in-car dashboard in the CarPlay. It's so sweet.
Yep, so just download the app, the Bloomberg Business app. Just download the app, connect your phone to your car, and get started. It's all.
And I've been listening to a lot more of our podcasts lately because of that.
It's right there.
It just makes it so much easier. I just, I'm driving along, I just click, and now I'm listening to Elon Inc., which is really cool.
Yeah, it is a good one. And it's all presented by our sponsor, Interactive Brokers. All right, let's check in with this market here. As Charlie was just reporting, we got some green on the screen here. Let's check in with Bailey Lipschultz. He covers the markets for Bloomberg News. He joins us here in our Bloomberg studio here in New York City. Billy, what are you looking at?
Yeah, markets are higher. S&P really being driven by big tech. You have Microsoft, ticker MSFT, right now up 1.7%. This coming after the company hired the recently ousted OpenAI former CEO Sam Altman, so getting a bit of a bid there, followed by Apple, ticker AAPL, right now up about 1%. NVIDIA up 0.9%, ticker NVDA. A lot of excitement, a lot of eyes going to be on NVIDIA's quarterly report tomorrow evening, but does seem like we are getting a bit of a bid back into some of those big technology stocks, some drivers, some just underlying investors going a bit more risk on and flocking back to those companies. Just going to call out some of the underperformers. Packaging stocks among the worst performers in the S&P 500. This coming after the industry benchmark was cut for a sixth time, a $20 a ton reduction. Bloomberg intelligence analyst Richard Bjork saying that the lowered results will extend into 2024. So you have International Paper, ticker IP, down 3%. Other laggards include Packaging Corp of America, ticker PKG, down 2.1%. And when we're talking about those companies, it feels kind of like another sign that it's a slow day, but we do have earnings on tap tomorrow.
Slow day? I mean,
well, it's
how
all
many
Altman.
insane stories are there?
I meant more for movers, like market events outside of stock events, excuse me.
Okay, because you've got OpenAI, right? You've got the Argentinian shock election results. I don't know if it's a shock, but fascinating election results. You've got Citi cutting 300 senior executives.
And
You've got workers over at another big Wall Street bank. I'm blanking right now. WFC. Wells Fargo trying to start a union.
All right, so a lot of news, not a lot of stock moving events, I would say, because the Citi cuts were well kind of expected. But Matt, to your point, looking at Argentinian stocks, the way that we track that is through some of those global MSCI ETFs. So ticker ARGT, Argentina ETF, right now up 12%, biggest jump on an intraday basis since March 2020. So
this is huge also. I was thinking last night as I saw these results, is this going to be good for Argentinian risk assets? Is it going to be good for Argentinian bonds or not? Because on the one hand, you had, the guy who lost would have continued essentially the same policies that have caused like 160% inflation. On the other hand, the new guy is a total wild card, right? He wants to dollarize the economy. He wants to buy some Bitcoin. He lives with his mom, kind of, so interesting story there. By the way, I see. Good wine. So in terms of the sectors, pretty much everything's moving up, led by tech, right? And Microsoft is leading the way with even the little gains of such a big company. The losers are utilities, consumer staples, and financials. Utilities and consumer staples, those are defensive sectors. So when those sell off, that says to me that this market just really wants to rally.
Yeah, and it does seem like, again, holiday shortened week, I feel like we're going to say that a million times. But when you look at some of the volume, we'll call out that is slower than average or has been over the last few days, about an 8% drop on a 100-day basis at this point in time for the S&P 500. But it does seem like, and we've been seeing analysts and strategists talking a Santa Claus rally if it were into existence, and we've seen such a sharp move higher over the last.
I was gonna say we're already up like 11% in the past 3 weeks.
Yep. So there's a lot of excitement about what could lie ahead. And to your point, Matt, when you look at kind of where major averages are up, we had that almost 6% rally the first week of November, really the end of October, and then 1.3 and 2.2% on the S&P 500. So a sharp move higher, and it does seem like that is going to continue. But again, NVIDIA tomorrow evening, alongside a bunch of retailers ahead of the Thanksgiving holiday, could throw a wrench into things.
All right, good stuff. We appreciate that. Bailey Lipschultz, he covers all the markets for Bloomberg News, getting us up to date here. Again, the S&P's up about 0.5%. Well, Matt was just mentioning it, just tons and tons of news out there, and certainly top of the list is that OpenAI. Who's running it? Who owns it? I don't know what's going on here. Where are all the workers going? Ashley Vance, fortunately for us, he's out there in Palo Alto. He's right in the midst of it. He's a reporter for Bloomberg Business Week. Ashley, can you give us the latest here? Just where is everybody right now?
What a good question.
Yes, I don't know where everybody is.
So Sam Altman, the previous CEO of OpenAI until a couple of days ago, and Greg Brockman, the company's president, are officially Microsoft employees. Microsoft is offering jobs to any OpenAI employees that want to leave and go work there. And separately, about 600 of OpenAI's 770 employees have signed a letter saying they intend to either stay at the company if Sam and Greg come back, or to follow Sam and Greg to Microsoft.
So how has the board at OpenAI responded here?
They signed a letter. The guys who threw him out signed the letter.
One guy, the one who started this, Ilya Stutskaver, he was on the OpenAI board. He's one of the co-founders. He is the one who really kicked all this off. He was the one who was worried about Sam. He has now signed the letter. So there's 3 more board members who control OpenAI's fate. And I think investors in the company, Microsoft, are all trying to talk at least 2 of them into reversing this decision and just bringing the band back together.
And if they can't, well, wait a second. Is Microsoft really trying to talk them into that? Because they already have hired Sam Altman and Brockman, the president.
What does
Plus,
that mean?
Well, everybody else wants to go there too. Paul, you're the one who tells me about, a bank's most valuable assets go up and down the elevators every day, right? I'm sure that for the most part, the same is true about OpenAI, right, Ashley? And all of those assets are going right over to Microsoft if they don't get their buyout from Thrive.
Absolutely. I mean, I think there's a situation where, yes, this could end up at Microsoft. I think Microsoft could live with that. I think even Microsoft, there's a cleaner option here where OpenAI does its own thing, and there's a bit of separation between the two. I have very personal doubts that Sam Altman actually intends on being a long-term Microsoft employee, and I think this is really just to try and force the board's hand.
I mean, I think. Well, I don't know. I guess the question is, can they, in fact, they being the board, put the genie back in the bottle and just say, let's just forget the last?
Well, they have
3
to
days.
quit. They have to resign. That's
exactly.
So,
I mean, do you think that's a viable scenario here?
Well, Ilya was the one who started all this. Now that he has flipped, it's fascinating. This is like coup inception, right? Coups on top of coups, and so they just have to get 2 more people out of these 3 to flip it. If Ilya was kind of the intellectual underpinning of this whole thing, maybe 2 of those other 3 just decide none of this is worth it. Meanwhile, there's a whole new CEO at OpenAI, Emmett Shear, who is inheriting all of this.
Classically, because Mira Murati, who was like the chief, I don't know, technical officer or something, she was named the interim CEO for like 48 hours. At first, she was honored and humbled to accept the position, and then she signed the letter saying she wants the board to resign or she's going to Microsoft too.
So over the weekend, initially she was team board, and somewhere around Saturday she switched to team Sam. And so it's just I've covered Silicon Valley for about 25 years.
And so that's what I wanted to ask, Ashley. I mean, we actually have a bureau in Palo Alto. You were cruising around the valley this weekend, getting your Starbucks coffee and your kale salad with all your buddies out there. Do the folks in Palo Alto and in Silicon Valley know how just embarrassing this is for them? I mean, it's just ridiculous. It looks like a bunch of children running around with this technology.
Are you asking if they should be more adult like Elon Musk or the others in Silicon Valley?
We're going to go to Elon Musk in just a little bit. Don't you worry about that. So it's kind of such an odd situation, Ashley.
And there's something either alarming or hilarious about all this, which is we've spent the last year worrying about what happens if we get AGI, politicians stepping in, and now the world's leading company that might get to AGI first, it turns out, is just a complete clown car. And so, we're trying to put in all these things in place to make sure disasters don't happen. And it turns out sort of 4 people who get upset about something can really set things off in a very strange direction.
Tell us about Elon's role, Ashley, because you wrote the book, right, about Elon Musk.
Elon Musk, Tesla, SpaceX, and the quest for a fantastic future.
Yeah, or a deadly future, right? If AI and Skynet are going to kill us all, at least we'd have the Terminator. Yeah. What does Elon Musk think about all this?
Well, in the last couple months, so Elon was once upon a time a co-founder of OpenAI and an ally of Sam. They fell out. This is a pattern of Sam's, of falling out of favor with people. And Elon, in the last couple of months, started a rival AI research institution. This is his second one, obviously. And so, in some sense, I think it's probably happy to see this. OpenAI was racing ahead of everyone. This obviously slows them down and gives Grok, his new company, time to catch up. I think Elon is such an alarmist about AI writ large, though, that, I'm sure he actually has some concerns about what happens to this technology now.
What do you think about the concerns You know, initially I thought it was just some marketing when Altman was like, this stuff is so dangerous, we probably shouldn't even be selling it to our clients. But still, they're selling it to their clients because they get money for that. Is it really that dangerous?
You know, not yet. Most of this is hypothetical. I think some of this is, again, comedic. We have two companies, OpenAI and Anthropic, which was a group of OpenAI employees that broke off. They both have these very strange nonprofit structures around them. You know, in the idea being we're going to safeguard AI and do this responsibly. I find this sort of amusing because you also have Google, Meta, China, a number of other companies racing as fast as they can. None of these companies are really that much farther ahead of the other. If one gets to AGI, the rest will follow in a matter of months. And so, you know, I just feel like these very bizarre corporate structures is just not really solving anything when you have about 10 players that are probably going to get to this technology at close to the same time.
Right. Hey, Ashley, while we have you, and since you're a Musk expert here, there's some continued trouble over at X from a bunch of big advertisers pulling back after Elon has made some remarks or endorsed some remarks. What's the latest there?
Well, you know, yes, there's a lot of drama leading into the weekend. Elon has quite the tendency to undermine all of his business efforts at Twitter with quite radical tweets. In this case, some tweets that some people found anti-Semitic. Elon argues that he's definitely not an anti-Semite. And advertisers ran away. Their ads were being placed next to some of these tweets. And, you know, it's just another example of what a chaotic situation Twitter has been since day one, because Elon many times just cannot keep his Twitter mouth shut, you know, much to the detriment of his business.
Wow. All right, so just 30 seconds. What should we be looking for next on this OpenAI thing here in the next hour or day?
You know, I haven't slept, so let's have more action. But, you know, it very much seems like this is not a done deal, at least for the people who are OpenAI's investors and its top executives. They, to me, what I'm hearing is they really think there's still a chance that this board can go, a new board can come in, Sam and Greg can come back, and that the whole thing sort of just ends up where we started with a new governance structure. It's unclear, obviously, that will happen, but that's what people are pushing towards. So this isn't done yet.
All right, we'll stay tuned, as they say. Ashley Vance, he's a reporter for Bloomberg Business Week, located in our Palo Alto bureau, so right smack in the middle of Silicon Valley, and right smack in the middle of this OpenAI issue that is, you know, still extraordinarily fluid.
Oh, and we have NVIDIA coming out with earnings, right, tonight. And then don't forget that Elon Musk said he was going to file a thermonuclear lawsuit against Media Matters today. So we're still waiting for those headlines to cross.
All right, very good. We'll stay on top of it. This is Bloomberg. Let's get some company news right now with Lisa Mateo.
You got it, Paul. Citigroup is eliminating more than 300 senior manager roles. Now, sources tell Bloomberg it will affect staffers 2 levels below CEO Jane Frazier's executive management team. Bloomberg's Sonali Basak spoke about it earlier.
This is really just the tip of the iceberg. It's about 10% of the workers at that level being cut. This is, again, a couple levels below the executive team. But you have to now think about a cascading effect across the bank. All the levels of management across the entire globe, plus folks that do work in back office and technology roles as well.
Citi shares right now, they're up about 0.5%. Amazon is stepping up the competition in the battle for talent with Microsoft, Google, and other companies. Bloomberg's Steve Rappaport has that story.
Lisa, the Wall Street Journal reports the e-commerce giant is launching free classes on artificial intelligence with a goal to train 2 million people in the technology by 2025. AI Ready is centered on 8 online courses that focus on generative AI and target people with both tech and tech-related roles, from beginners to more advanced.
Amazon up about 0.8%. Meanwhile, Amazon drivers picketed a warehouse in Chicago today over what they're calling unfair labor practices. That walkout is the latest in a 4-month strike by drivers from the company's delivery station in Palmdale, California, that has spread to warehouses nationwide. And workers at Wells Fargo branches in Albuquerque, New Mexico, and Bethel, Alaska, have filed to hold the first ever union elections at a major U.S. bank. Now, they're looking to join the Communication Workers of America under the banner Wells Fargo Workers United. Wells Fargo right now down about 0.5%. Those are the company stories we're following this hour. I'm Lisa Mateo. This is Bloomberg.
Profits, headlines and breaking news 24 hours a day at Bloomberg.com, on Bloomberg Television, and the Bloomberg Business app. This is a Bloomberg Business Flash.
It's 12:21 on Wall Street. We do check markets all day long here at Bloomberg with the Dow, the S&P, and NASDAQ all advancing right now. A 21-point gain in the S&P to 4534, up by about 0.5%. The Dow's up 122 points, up by 0.4, while NASDAQ is up 112, higher by 0.8%. 10-year yield at 4.45%. We do have spot gold down $4 the ounce to $19.75, drop there of 0.2%. And West Texas Intermediate crude up 2.8%. WTI now at 78.04 a barrel on WTI. The lending arm of Toyota Motor will pay $60 million to settle allegations by an American regulator that it misled customers into buying extra products that boosted their payments and gave them a runaround when they tried to cancel. Shares of Toyota, they are down now by 3%. Again, recapping, stocks are higher. S&P up 21 points, up by about 0.5%. I'm Charlie Pelleton. That is a Bloomberg Business Flash.
Charlie, thanks very much. Charlie Pellet there with your Bloomberg Business Flash. Now, we have been talking a lot about airlines on this program and the difficulty that the manufacturers have making enough planes. There was just a huge order, right, for 300 of was it the 737? Or
I think so. I don't know.
In any case,
a whole bunch of them.
If you order a plane today, your chances of getting it soon are very low. I just got a message from Ali Ben El Maldani, the CEO of ABL Aviation. He said he was at the show and put in some orders there too, and he could come on and talk about it. So I was like, great, come in the studio. He's in New York for one day only.
Oh, we got him.
We get him on set. Ali, thanks so much for joining us. Tell us about the state of aviation in terms of ordering a plane right now. How difficult is it? You know, what are the prices like, and when can you actually expect to get delivery?
Thank you so much, Matt, for having me. It was a pleasure. It's always an issue, I think, to get aircraft today. As we said last time, you have 7 years to 8 years wait for both manufacturers, Boeing or Airbus. You have some issues, of course, with the engines. You saw what's happened with Pratt & Whitney. So we have a few issues on the engine side that we need to fix, and that's been fixed by the OEMs. You saw Dubai Air Show last week was the biggest order since 2017. So the order book in Dubai was insane. You had Emirates that's made a huge order, Fly Dubai. Ethiopian made a big order. So there's a big demand. There's not enough supply, and that's the first issue. And even since a lot of aircraft during COVID got so tired, it's extremely hard today for airlines to find aircraft that they can operate. And that's one of the biggest issues. We spoke about it last time when we were here. We keep on seeing it more and more. And even the order, like 737-800 and the classics, are being asked to come back to the markets because we need them to fly them. And we see, again, during the Christmas season where there's a big need. You saw it last summer. I think we spoke about you guys going to Europe. What was the cost of tickets that was going higher and higher because of the demand and the lack of aircraft being provided.
So I envision a desert in Arizona or New Mexico, and a lot of 737s, a lot of 757s are sitting out there because they were decommissioned for whatever reason over whatever recent period of time. Can I just go grab one of those planes and refurbish them and put them back in the air?
It's not as easy as you think. So if you want to get what we call an aircraft airworthy again, you have a long process to go again to put that aircraft back into service. You're not going to just come and fly it again. It needs an inspection. It needs what we call an AD inspection. It needs a few inspections to get back, which are very costly. So the difference between the cost of getting it back and getting a new aircraft, that's where there's an arbitrage to be made. And we saw it in the last 2 to 3 years, where the cost of leasing a 737-800 or an A320, not a Neo, but an older generation, went to the roof. It went so expensive. So today, if you lease an aircraft, it's almost about 40 to 50% than it was a few years ago. So there is a big demand, and that impacts, of course, the ticket prices.
So, by the way, the big order was for 777s, the 777, right? That's the Emirates order that you're talking about.
777X.
777X.
Yes.
And that's what? It's a much bigger plane, right? You like the single aisle. You like the 737s and the A320s.
I like the 737, A320s. I love the A220, which is the smallest one that Delta operates a lot. We have lots of them with Delta and Air France. I love that because it's very liquid. You can move them very quickly. The cost of fitting them to a different airline is much less. If you need to have a wide body fitted again to a different airline, the cost is very high. We're speaking about $1 to at least $1 million to make it fit for basic, to make it fit to a new airline versus when it's a smaller one, when all economy class, I can move them very quickly between one airline and another one.
What is the state of the OEMs, the Airbus and the Boeing. Why are they having such a difficult time ramping up production?
Yeah, I don't understand that. You know, a couple years ago, I ordered a Mercedes G500, and it took about a year for them to make it. Now, they only have one factory in Graz in Austria, right? So I get that, and they're not making more than like 25,000 a year. These airplane manufacturers are like the biggest companies in the world. They have factories all over the place. Why can't they just get more people in there and make more metal?
Well, first of all, they don't have, if you look at Boeing or Airbus, they don't have factories all over the place. They have a certain amount of factory, each assembly line, it's not really a factory, it's an assembly line. Each assembly line have a certain amount that they can produce every month. You know, basically Seattle, all of them have a certain amount that they can produce. That's the first issue. So they cannot produce. They produce what they can produce.
Are they producing at max?
Yes, of course. They are producing at max capacity. They are doing their best to supply as much as they can. But the second issue that you have to remember, that it was a COVID that started doing COVID issue, is the supply chain. And if you look at all the supply chain, because you have to remember, Airbus and Boeing are assembler. They assemble everything that is provided to them. So the back supply chain is a big issue. So, and it's not only in aircraft. It's, as you said, in cars. If you want to order a car today and you're a specialist in car, Matt, there's a big issue of finding a car. If I tell you today, go find a G400 diesel, it's almost impossible to find because the guys sold this, and the cost of a car or an aircraft is about 20% than before COVID.
Right, so you've seen that huge inflation amount as well. What are margins like for you? I mean, does that inflation eat into your margin, or is the demand to lease aircraft still so strong?
The demand to these aircrafts is very, very strong. There's a big demand. But you have to remember, all of us, of course, leverage our deals. We need to get debt. The cost of debt is what kills us, I think, on the deals, because you have 70% to 80% of debt on each one of
And where does that debt come from? Do I go to the JP Morgan Chase and get a loan?
Yeah, JP Morgan is active in that market. So you have two types of debt, of course, secured and unsecured debt. You have either the banks, the banks that come and provide you a debt on it, you know, all the players from Bank of America to JP Morgan to Citi to the Japanese banks to the Chinese banks. And you used to have, which is a lot less active today, the capital markets. So before that, you can do an ABS, a securitization, and use that capital markets money, which was at that time cheaper. As of today, the capital markets for aviation is not very active for the last 2 years. It used to be a lot more active on the ABS side. I think in the next year or two, it might come back. But the capital markets was a very competitive way of financing aircraft.
Is private credit, does that play a role?
Yes, of course, it's very active as well. Private credit, life insurance, lots of insurance, life insurance companies lend because the leases are 7 years, 8 years, 12 years. So it matches the maturity of the insurance, the life insurance companies.
We've heard from some of the just folks in the industry that India is a big growth market and will continue to be a huge buyer of aircraft as they look to expand their fleets. Are you seeing that?
Well, if you see the last order, that was about 3-4 months ago, of Air India, it was the biggest order ever made. I think it was about 500 aircraft that they ordered.
Wow. Okay. Yep.
So that order was huge.
Yep.
Look, India, with few airlines that are there, is an amazing jurisdiction. You can lease aircraft there. The issue that you have with India is how do you process aircrafts? Because in aviation, you have what we call a Cape Town countries. So those countries that signed the Cape Town Treaty allows you to repossess those aircraft.
Repossess those aircraft.
It's similar to Chapter 11 kind of treaty where you can go to those countries and they possess those aircraft.
So if an airline doesn't make its lease payment to you, you can literally go to that country and repossess.
Exactly.
Okay.
But in India, it's harder. I don't believe as of yet they're not a signatory of the Cape Town Treaty. You need to check, but I don't think they are. So that's harder on those countries that didn't sign the Cape Town Treaty to go repossess aircraft. That's the hardest part for us. If someone doesn't make payments similar to a car in America, you go repossess that car and lease it to someone else. That's what we do in aviation. You can move it from one airline to one airline. It's a Chapter 11. You do a possession. You fix the car or the aircraft and you move it.
What is China? Are they a signatory to the Cape Town?
Yeah, I believe so. I have to check. It changes on the monthly basis.
I know that Russia, the Russian war in Ukraine threw kind of a wrench into that in terms of that region. What has the Middle East been like since the Hamas-Israel conflict started? Has that been notable in the business?
In aviation, no. We didn't notice it. Most airlines even were doing the best. If you look at Emirates, Fly Dubai, all the airlines in the region are very active, are very operational. Like the profits are very interesting. Those airlines are really booming. So there is no impact. if we look at one of our clients, El Al in Israel, yes, there's a little bit of impacts, but El Al was very open with us. They tell us every day what's going on. They give us feedback. The government is supportive. So even for one of our clients, which is El Al in Israel, which with whom we have 5 787s, they are very open. They tell us everything, and that's what I love about El Al. They were always open in business. They always told us during COVID about payments, how to fix it. So the relationship with El Al is amazing. They were a very open airline to work with.
But how closely are you watching that? I mean, if things broaden out to Lebanon, Syria, if God forbid Iran gets involved, I mean, it's going to be difficult for every business.
But not only aviation. And look, Matt, you know me, I'm a very optimistic guy. I hope that this will never happen. I hope that people will come back to their reason and it will be fixed. You know, as a guy from Morocco that's do business, of course, with all religions, I think that it's just a political thing, and I hope it will stop. I don't believe on the long term it's a good thing for any of us. And not only in aviation, it will be an impact for everything. So I really hope it will stop, and it will have, if that's happened, it will have a lot more impact than the Russia-Ukraine, in my view, for aviation.
Right.
So because the region is very sensitive, it's in the middle between Asia and Europe. It's a region that is extremely important for us in aviation and in business. So my hope is that it will stop and come to an end.
All right, Ali, thank you so much for joining us yet again. Ali Ben El Madani, he's the CEO of ABL Aviation, gives us a good view into the world of aviation and aviation finance. Right now, with our news in New York City, here's Leslie Lotto.
Thank you, Matt and Paul. Remembering Rosalind Carter, the former First Lady who died on Sunday at the age of 96. She and the former President Jimmy were married for 77 years, the longest of any U.S. presidential couple, celebrating their success in their last TV interview. That was on ABC.
Having Rosen say, okay, finally, and staying with me all this long has been the most wonderful thing in my life.
He's pretty wonderful in my life, too.
The Israel-Hamas war is now on day 45, featuring intense fighting around another hospital in northern Gaza as Israeli forces, that is, expand their assault in the region on Sunday. 31 premature babies were reportedly removed from a hospital, but hundreds of staff and patients remained inside. The White House says Israel is as close as it's ever been to reaching a deal with Hamas to release some of the hostages from the October 7th attack. Brown University political scientist Wendy Schiller says there are risks with Israel working with Qatar to free the captives.
Generally, we have an ally in Qatar. We're not always a big fan of everything they do. Sheltering Hamas would be one of those things, the leaders of Hamas. But generally, we work with them. And so them as an intermediary in terms of Israel-Palestine, Israel-Hamas is one aspect of it, but it's also our relationship with them in the Middle East that's also on the line. You know, 50 hostages would be amazing, that those people would be released and safe, but there are also, you know, leaving 150 minimally other hostages, you know, that are not safe. And so, you know, the president will get credit, but then of course the question will be, why not all of them? You know, why only 50?
That's Wendy Schiller, director of Brown's Taubman Center for American Politics and Policy. Global news 24 hours a day and whenever you want it with Bloomberg News Now. I'm Leslie Lotto, and this is Bloomberg.
news, headlines, and breaking news 24 hours a day at Bloomberg.com, on Bloomberg Television, and the Bloomberg Business app. This is a Bloomberg Business Flash.
It's 12:40 on Wall Street. We do check markets all day long here at Bloomberg with the Dow, the S&P, and NASDAQ beginning the new trading week, a holiday-shortened trading week, very much in the green. 19-point advance right now for the S&P 500 index, on track for its highest since August. The NASDAQ 100 on pace for a 22-month high. Right now, the NASDAQ 100 index is up 0.8%. The NASDAQ Composite Index up 0.8%. The Dow up 0.3%, higher by 112 points, and a 10-year yield now of 4.45%. Spot gold down $8 the ounce to $19.72, drop there of 0.4%, while West Texas Intermediate crude oil is up 2.8%, $78.02 a barrel on WTI. Well, next up for Wall Street, the latest Fed minutes. We'll be getting those at 2 o'clock tomorrow, Wall Street time. Nancy Curtin is Global Chief Investment Officer and Head of Investment Advisory at ATI International Operations, and she was a guest this morning on Bloomberg Markets.
What a legacy for Chair Powell to be remembered as, the Fed chair that was able to maneuver into a soft landing. And we do think that is possible. And as a matter of fact, we think, gosh, you need to think twice about being too restrictive here, imposing a lot of difficulty on pain on the labor market if you don't have to, and inflation starts heading lower.
And that's Nancy Curtin of ALTI International Operations. And you can hear more of that conversation on the Tape podcast. You can download it wherever you get your podcasts. After the close of trading tomorrow, we will be hearing from NVIDIA, and its quarterly results could still exceed sky-high investor expectations thanks to strong demand for generative artificial intelligence. NVIDIA shares up now by 1.1%. Again, recapping, stocks are higher, S&P up by 0.4%. I'm Charlie Pelleton. That is a Bloomberg Business Flash.
All right, Charlie Pelleton, thank you so much. We appreciate that. Matt Miller, Paul Sweeney live here in our Bloomberg Interactive Broker studio. We're also streaming live video on YouTube, so head over to youtube.com and search Bloomberg Radio. All right, we got the SPX up, kind of around 18% this year. But when you take a look at the S&P on an equal weighted basis, to take out kind of the outlandish kind of performance of some of those big 7 or 8 big tech names, it's only up about 2 or 3%. So the question is, do we need more breadth in this market? And a lot of folks would say yes. But where do we go from here? Tim Pagliara, he's the CIO at CapWealth. I think he's probably got some ideas here, Tim. So, Tim, again, you take out some of the big winners of the market, the Apples, the Amazons of the world. The performance this year is low single digits. How do you guys think about closing out this year heading into 2024?
Well, you're preaching to the choir. The breadth of the market needs to expand if you're going to get any performance at all on the index that's going into next year. It would be hard for the Magnificent Seven to have anything resembling a repeat performance. And so you could see a 10% increase in 493 companies in the S&P 500, and you could see the others flat, and you'd be up 7%. So, the math becomes very, very difficult at this point when you're trying to move the needle for a return for investors.
All right. So in the equity side of the business, where do you think you want to be? Because quite frankly, inflation has come down, but for a lot of this economy, inflation is still an issue. Prices are higher than where they were a couple of years ago. So how does it influence kind of what stocks or what sectors maybe you look at?
I think history is our best teacher right now. If you go back 24 years, the longer-term performance of the S&P 500, and this incorporates a couple of market crashes and a financial crisis, the long-term performance of the S&P 500 in that 24-year period is 6.6%. So when you look at, for example, Microsoft and Pepsi-Cola, their return's about 9.5%. Good, sustainable businesses, especially Microsoft now with what they have done in the last 10 years with their business model. But then, a company like Snap-on Tools and Costco, 12.5% returns compared to the 9.5% for Pepsi and the 9.5% for Microsoft So it's going to be a stock picker's market. Investors are going to have to put together individual portfolios made up of great companies and sustainable business models. And even then, that's going to take a lot of skill and a lot of patience. Coca-Cola, for example, in that same 24-year period, is only up 5.5%. Dividends are going to be more important as well, especially in an environment where we're going to have, as we believe, protracted longer interest rates or longer, higher interest rates.
Yep.
So it's a combination of all those factors that great challenges for individual investors. People, it's an environment, like Henry Druckenmiller said, like the 70s. People made a lot of money in the 70s. You just didn't make it off of indexes and following the crowd.
Right. How about, we just finished up, or we're in the process of finishing up this earnings season here. What are the takeaways for you coming out of this earnings season?
I think it's kind of a tale of two cities. You've got companies that, again, in that Magnificent Seven and others, they're pulling the multiple of the market up from 19. And you have a whole basket of great companies, including financial services firms that are trading at less than 10 times earnings, to get to that number. So I think the earnings season was good. But again, to sustain higher prices on equities, you're going to have to see earnings improvement, and you're going to have to see a stronger economy than what most people are forecasting.
All right. So, I'm thinking about just, the tough performance everybody had in 2022. You couldn't make money in stocks or bonds. 23, we're doing a little bit better here. Certainly, if you're long some of those tech names as we talked about. But boy, I can just buy a 2-year treasury here and get darn near 5% here, Tim. Is that the wrong strategy here?
No, I think it was probably a good time for everybody to reestablish a more normal asset allocation. I mean, bonds made absolutely no sense. And the 60-40 split, if it hadn't been for the outsized performance of the S&P, it would be negative, as bonds are even this year are down about 4%. So treasuries give you the opportunity to get a reasonable return. And at a certain point in time, then you can lengthen out your maturities once you think that the Fed is finished with their work. I mean, even, the talk about a 2% inflation rate target, if we were there and we're not, then the 10-year treasury is appropriately priced at around 4.5%. So people that are expecting some big drop in longer-term rates, that's just not going to happen unless we're in some type of big financial crisis or global crisis, and the Fed's willing to look the other way on inflation.
Hey, Tim, it's just we've seen energy. Oil prices kind of whip all around. We're up to about 2.8% on WTI crude today to $78 a barrel, but it's been all over the place. How do you guys think about the energy space?
We're long energy. We believe that they represent good values. We think that the whole conversion to ESG is going to take much longer from a technology standpoint and just from a practical standpoint. I mean, we're just now starting to understand some of the implications of just building a battery plant, and the amount of, one battery plant in Kansas is going to require the equivalent of a coal-fired energy plant just to provide the energy necessary to produce them. So, there's it's going to be energy, fossil fuel, it's going to be part of daily life for a long time.
Yep, absolutely. All right, Tim, thanks so much for joining us here. Tim Pagliara, he's the CIO at Cap Wealth, based down there in Tennessee. Looking at these markets here, the S&P 500 up 0.4%. NASDAQ doing a little bit better, up about 0.8%. The Russell, which had been outperforming over the last couple of weeks, it's up about 0.4% as well. Yields tick up slightly. The 2-year Treasury is up 3 basis points, 4.91%. The 10 years at 4.45%. And you go out on the 30-year, far end of the curve here, 4.6%. So not a bad place to be. And as we were talking about, oil up higher as well. Bitcoin up 1.8%. We're going to have more coming up. This is Bloomberg. at some company news right now with Lisa Mateo.
Hey there, Paul. Hundreds of OpenAI employees have threatened to resign and follow ousted leader Sam Altman to Microsoft unless the current board resigns. We get more from Bloomberg's Ed Ludlow.
Around 2/3 of the remaining OpenAI staff have signed a letter to the board, which we at Bloomberg have just reviewed. And they're saying to the board that they need to reflect on how they've acted. And almost 500 of those employees are threatening to resign and walk away if the board doesn't engage with them.
Microsoft right now up nearly 2%. When it comes to artificial intelligence, many workers say the companies they work for aren't clear enough about how they plan to use the technology.
More than half of all workers surveyed recently say they have no idea how their employer is using or intends to use AI, and that's got some of them worried. The survey by Workplace Intelligence shows 3/4 of workers would be more accepting and excited about AI if their company was more transparent about how it plans to use it.
And that was Bloomberg's Scott Carr reporting. A few leadership changes to tell you about this morning. NRG Energy CEO Maurizio Gutierrez is leaving the company. Chairman Lawrence Coben will become the interim CEO. NRG right now down about 2%. Former White House Chief of Staff Ron Klain, who served during President Biden's first 2 years in the office, well, he has a new role. Airbnb says he will join the company as Chief Legal Officer on January 1st. Airbnb up about 2%. And Morgan Stanley has named Jed Finn to head the company's $4.8 trillion wealth management business. Morgan Stanley down about 0.5%. Those are the company stories we're following this hour. I'm Lisa Mateo, and this is Bloomberg.
This is Bloomberg Markets with Paul Sweeney and Matt Miller on Bloomberg Radio.
All right, taking a look at these markets here. S&P 500 up 0.4%. NASDAQ up about 0.8%. Yields a little bit higher here. The 10-year Treasury is up about 2.5 basis points, 4.46% here. Looking at gold, a little bit lower here, $1,973 an ounce, and WTI crude oil just above, a couple ticks above $78 a barrel. That's up about 2.8% for WTI crude oil. With our news in New York City, here's Leslie Otto.
Paul and Matt, thank you. Israeli forces engaged in heavy fighting with Hamas in the northern Gaza Strip overnight as the U.S. said it was optimistic about a deal to free hostages held by the militant group. We asked Israeli government spokesperson Elan Levy about the progress in getting the hostages freed.
Israeli society is, of course, sick with worry for the fate of our 240 hostages, including 30 children. I really do mean sick with worry. People aren't sleeping properly. We're doing everything we can to bring them home. You'll understand that I can't comment on sensitive negotiations that are ongoing because human lives hang in the balance. We hope to bring these people home, but the less we say, the better at this point.
Meanwhile, the Hamas-run health industry in Gaza says at least 12 people have been killed in an Israeli airstrike on the Indonesian hospital in Gaza City. An Israeli military statement said that it continued to target terrorists. The regional director for the World Health Organization, Dr. Rick Brennan, says WHO condemns the use of medical facilities for military purposes and condemns attacks on healthcare.
In this crisis, we've documented over 150 attacks on hospitals and healthcare in Gaza, and also 33 attacks by Hamas on healthcare in Israel.
Global news 24 hours a day and whenever you want it with Bloomberg News Now. I'm Leslie Lotto, and this is Bloomberg. Back to you, Matt and Paul.
All right, Leslie, thank you very much. We appreciate it. Matt Miller, Paul Sweeney, live here in our Bloomberg Interactive Broker Studio. We're streaming live as well on YouTube, so you can head over to youtube.com and search Bloomberg Radio. The mayor of London, Sadiq Khan, has rejected Madison Square Garden's plans to build a giant orb-shaped entertainment venue in East London's Stratford district. The mayor rejected the plans for an entertainment venue covered in LED panels because it would cause excessive harm to local residents who would be impacted by light pollution. That's according to people familiar with the matter, who asked not to be identified as the decision has not yet been published. The proposals had previously been approved by the London Legacy Development Corporation, which has planning powers over the site that hosted the London 2012 Olympic Games. The land was used as a car park during the event. Representatives of Greater London Authority did not immediately respond to requests for comment. While we are disappointed in London's decision, there are many forward-thinking cities that are eager to bring this technology to their communities, Severe Entertainment said in an emailed statement. We will concentrate on those. The plans, which were originally fired in 2019, include a 90-meter-high dome that could have accommodated 21,500 people for live music and entertainment events. That drew fierce opposition from groups including AEG Presents, owner of the nearby O2 Arena. The mayor of London has power to overrule local planning authorities within the city, but his decisions are also subject to potential call-in by the government, which could still reverse the decision. Madison Square Garden has developed a similar attraction in Las Vegas known as the Sphere, which looks pretty cool, but maybe that's because it's in Vegas. Maybe you don't want that in your backyard if you're in London, so we'll have to see how that plays out. Looking at these markets, finishing out the hour here, still green on the screen. We've got some good movement there in the S&P up 0.4%. A little bit of better strength in NASDAQ up 0.8%. The VIX I will call out for Tom Keene. It's the measure of volatility in the equity markets. It is below 14 right now, 13.67 on your VIX. The Bloomberg Dollar Index off slightly against a basket of currencies, off about 0.4% for the dollar. Yields slightly higher here. The 10-year Treasury is up about 2 basis points, 4.45%. So certainly off that 5% level we had back there in late October. WTI crude oil reversing its recent declines, up about 2.9%. We're at $78.10 per barrel for WTI crude oil. Sound On with Joe Matthew in Washington, D.C. That starts right now.
our nation's capital, this is Bloomberg Sound On.
Two major stories that we're following here developing before our eyes.
What does it say about Trump's influence on the Republican Party?
What can the Biden administration do on its own to support Israel?
Bloomberg Sound On. Politics, policy, and perspective from D.C.'s top names.
The Republican caucus is at war with itself.
Members of Congress would have a press conference every day if somebody would cover that.
There is bipartisan support for Israel.
This is one of the big ones we only see once every decade or 2 decades in the Middle East.
Bloomberg Sound On with Joe Matthew on Bloomberg Radio.
President Biden celebrates his 81st birthday with an all-time low approval rating. Welcome to the fastest show in politics. New polling out that could bring new worries to the Biden camp as the president tries to navigate multiple crises abroad and a funding standoff at home. We'll talk about it ahead with Kyle Kondik, the managing editor of Sabato's Crystal Ball at the University of Virginia Center for Politics, is with us straight ahead. Republicans are taking aim at Kyrsten Sinema in Arizona, even though she hasn't announced a run yet. We'll have more campaign analysis coming up from our signature panel. With us this Monday, as you would hope, Bloomberg Politics contributors Jeannie Shanzano and Rick Davis. They're with us for the hour. And we start, as always, with a look at Wall Street. We get up to date on trading now with Charlie Pellet in New York. Hey, Charlie.
Thank you very much, Joe Matthew. With the Dow, the S&P and NASDAQ all advancing. S&P right now very close to session highs, up 19 points. That is a gain right now of about 0.4%. Dow Jones Industrial Average up 117 points, up now by 0.3%. The NASDAQ Composite Index is higher by 105 points, up by about 0.8%. 10-year yield 4.44%, with a 2-year that's yielding 4.91%. Gold down $5 the ounce to $19.75, down now by about 0.3%. While West Texas Intermediate crude oil is up 2.9%, 78.10 a barrel on WTI. Bitcoin up 1.8%, 37,694 right now on Bitcoin. Richmond Fed President Thomas Barkin says U.S. economic data points to an economy that is expanding while price growth is slowing, but the progress is not sufficient for the Fed to declare victory on inflation. As for the overall economic backdrop and the market environment, Russ Kosterich is portfolio manager at BlackRock, and he was interviewed this morning on Bloomberg Surveillance.
I think that what's probably likely is the Saudis are going to continue that 1 million barrel a day cut, but they would like to wind that back at some point in 2024. And so in order to do that, they've either got to get the rest of OPEC Plus on board to cut more, or they've got to say, hey, market conditions are doing better. We think that there's room for more supply.
All right, clearly a conversation all about what's going on with the price of crude oil. And as we mentioned today, we do have West Texas Intermediate crude advancing. WTI up today by 2.9%, 78.10 a barrel right now on West Texas Intermediate crude. So again, recapping here, we do have stocks advancing. S&P 500 index up now by 25 points, a gain there of 0.4%. I'm Charlie Pellet, and that is a Bloomberg Business Flash.
Okay, Charlie, thanks. Welcome to the Monday edition of Bloomberg Sound On. I'm Joe Matthew in Washington, where it's just us kids, House and Senate around. Well, the president is here, after all, so are the turkeys. Big doings today at the White House, not in the Rose Garden, interestingly, but on the South Lawn, pardoning the national turkey and the backup as the president celebrates his 81st birthday. Yes, grabbing the third rail of politics along with the turkeys, not Social Security or Medicare, but his age.
This is the 76th anniversary of this event. And I want you to know I wasn't there in the first one. I was too young to make it up.
But he was alive 76 years ago. That's, of course, one of the major factors we keep hearing in this campaign, as the now 81-year-old runs against the, I believe, 76-year-old Donald Trump. You might check me on that. And big questions about the role that age may play in this campaign as the president wakes up to a new
low in his approval rating, according to the latest national NBC News poll. That would be 40%. And we've seen lower numbers in other polls, but for this one, not great. And we begin our conversation there with a lot of campaign news to talk about today with Kyle Kondik, the managing editor of Sabado's Crystal Ball, joining us from the Center for Politics at the University of Virginia. Kyle, it's good to see you. Maybe it's a good thing he got the birthday out of the way. He doesn't have to celebrate this near an election. Is there at least that upside for Joe Biden?
I mean, I guess it's also kind of a slow news week, and I don't know if Biden's specific birthday matters more than just the overall fact that a lot of Americans think he's too old for the job, and they're concerned about his ability to do it because of his age. And of course, people do express some of the same concerns about Donald Trump, but it's always been more striking for Biden, just the higher percentage of people who are worried about his age. I frankly think it's because Biden maybe shows his age a little bit more than Trump. That's not to say that people aren't concerned about Trump for other reasons. It's just that for Biden, age does seem to be a pretty big factor here.
Yeah, for sure. 40% of registered voters approve of his job performance. 57% disapprove. We've got numbers as well specific to foreign policy. Kyle, he's having trouble with young people. You spend every day around young people by the nature of your job at the University of Virginia. These are 18 to 34-year-olds isolated in this poll to show a real spot of weakness. What does he do about that?
Look, I think Biden has had trouble with younger voters going back to the 2020 primary season. Younger voters were likely to support Bernie Sanders or than the broader electorate or, other Democratic candidates. Of course, Biden ended up winning that primary relatively easily after a very rocky start. And of course, young voters, rallied to him in 2020 and are generally a pretty Democratic constituency. But we've seen poll after poll lately where Biden is actually either, tied or losing with Donald Trump amongst young voters. I kind of don't believe that would actually happen in a general election setting. I think there might be just something going on with the polls right now that or some of those folks would come home. But even if you don't believe that Trump could actually beat Biden amongst young voters, which is how I would describe it myself, there probably is some softness there that Biden needs to firm up, because if there's, we're at a time where American elections are very closely contested and competitive, and if there is some erosion for Biden amongst the key constituency, like young people, either they're not supporting him at a high enough rate, they're bleeding over to third-party candidates, or they're just not showing up, or some of them are going to Trump. Any weakness there could be fatal again in an election where you'd expect the states that decide this thing to be exceedingly close. So it may be that the polls are overstating the problem or not realistically presenting the problem that Biden has with young voters. But their problem still exists, and that's I think that's my takeaway anyway.
Yeah, well, and the issue of Israel appears to be a problem among young voters when it comes to Joe Biden. Progressives are concerned about the loss of civilian life, calling for an end to the bombing. We're seeing pretty robust pro-Palestinian demonstrations like the one that we saw in front of DNC headquarters. On the other hand, we don't see voters making decisions based on foreign policy typically, Kyle, and I wonder how you see that, if at all, playing out in this election as an issue for young voters. Do they simply stay home if they don't see what they like?
Yeah, I mean, and look, the younger voters, I think, are likelier than the overall electorate to basically take the side of the Palestinians or be more sympathetic to the Palestinians and this, these disputes between the Israelis and the Palestinians. And, whether that lasts or whether it matters next November, I mean, whether this is a big focus at the time of the election next fall, I think that's an open question. But here again, you have an issue where Biden is maybe taking a bit of, different position than I think that some young people would take. Now, of course, those folks aren't going to find more support for the Palestinians from Donald Trump either. In fact, he's probably more pro-Israeli reflexively than Biden is. But that's where you then wonder about some of these voters just staying home or voting third party or whatnot. So again, it's an issue where, to the extent it matters among young people, it might be hurting, it might be sort of helping to hurt Biden's numbers with that demographic.
Well, if we were going to Joe Biden's birthday party and we wanted to say something nice, there are a couple of other numbers out there today that worth hitting, Kyle, and I'd love your reaction. We've got another drop from Siena. This is the New York Times poll that got people in a spin a couple of weeks ago about Joe Biden. It was not great for him when you started looking at swing states. In this case, it's about the hypothetical. New York, this is New York State, by the way, Trump versus Biden. Biden is up by 10, and maybe we shouldn't be surprised in New York. But when you add Trump versus Biden, Kennedy, and West, it's still a Biden advantage. There's another one out there today, Harvard-Harris poll, Kyle, that shows more than half, in fact, more than 60% of Trump primary voters say there's at least some chance they would support a candidate other than Donald Trump in the Republican presidential primary. We're a year out here, essentially, Kyle, and I wonder how much stock you put in any of these.
If you wanted to cherry pick some numbers, you could find some weakness for Trump in his own primary, be it those people saying they're open to voting for other candidates. There have been some other polls that have suggested that. And yet when you actually ask about the named candidates, Trump is generally well over 50 nationally, and he's at least over 40 in Iowa, New Hampshire, the leadoff states. And, there's the same kind of problem that Republicans had, and it's an even bigger problem in 2024 than it was in 2016, where, you could say, oh, well, more than half the people aren't supporting Trump in these polls, but their votes are all splintered among Nikki Haley and Ron DeSantis and a couple of other candidates. I'm curious to see if we actually do see a real race in Iowa, New Hampshire, and whether that might mean anything for future contests. Whether Trump's support may be overstated at this point. But I mean, the numbers are what they are, and I mean, Trump has been in a really solid position. Even if you can find, you sometimes see this in polling, people will express support for some sort of generic outcome, but then when you give them the specifics on the candidate choices, they'll behave differently. Sometimes, generic Democrat or generic Republican will look really great, but of course, that's not a real option.
Spending time with Kyle Kondik from Sabato's Crystal Ball, the University of Virginia Center for Politics. You cranked out a really interesting story a couple of days ago, a piece of research from your shop about the flood of retirements that I'd like to get into with you. The latest one was Congressman Kildee of Michigan. We're seeing a lot of establishment members on both sides of the aisle call it quits. Kyle, I'm assuming everyone's got their own reasoning here, but the more chaotic things get, the more the retirements seem to stack up. And I'm wondering where we are when it comes to D's versus R's and what impact that's going to have on the balance of power in the House and Senate in this election.
Yeah, if you look at the actual competitive seats, I mean, there have been a lot of retirements lately. Most House seats are not competitive in general election sense, so it stands to reason that most retirements would also not really impact the general election. And that's been a prominent thing among these retirements. Particularly, there's been a number of Republicans from districts that just really aren't winnable for Democrats in in anything other than like a huge Democratic wave sort of environment. Maybe even not then, but. If you look at the actual competitive seats, so the only open seat right now that Republicans are defending that's really competitive is George Santos' seat. And of course, he retired. And it's not like George Santos saying he's not going to run in 2024 hurts Republicans. It probably actually helps them in their quest to hold that toss-up seat that Joe Biden won by several points. But then if you look on the Democratic side, there are some open seats that are like in the toss-up or kind of like leaning Democratic categories, most competitive races. Abigail Spanberger in Virginia 7, she is running for governor in 2025. Yep. She's not running again. You mentioned Kildee in Michigan. That's a toss-up seat. Alyssa Slotkin running for U.S. Senate in Michigan. She leaves behind a narrow Biden toss-up seat. Katie Porter out in California has been running for Senate for a while. That's another open seat that, while Democratic leaning at the presidential level, it performs a little bit, I'd say significantly more competitively down ballot. So as Democrats try to piece together a House majority next year, which they're perfectly capable of winning, they do have just more sort of open seat defense to play. And, retirements often will spike at this time of year. People go home for the holidays, they reassess things, they wonder whether they're going to come back or not. Filing deadlines are approaching in some places, and a lot of people just decide not to come back. I'm curious to see if there are any other retirements that significantly impact the competitive battlefield. the Kildee retirement in Michigan is definitely one of those, because I think he would have probably still had a competitive race as an incumbent, but I think he would have been favored, whereas now like that seat is like 50-50.
You did adjust your rating, while it may not be a surprise for West Virginia Senate after Joe Manchin announced his plans. Kyle, what will it mean for the balance of power in the Senate?
Yeah, I was just focusing on the House there, but of course, certainly the most meaningful Senate retirement was Joe Manchin recently, and that goes from just a slightly leaning Republican race with Manchin on the ballot to basically no doubt safe Republican pickup. And we've seen this in some previous cycles when Republicans have won the Senate, like in 2014. There were a few red state Democratic retirees, and Republicans ended up winning those seats easily, including in West Virginia in 2014 when Jay Rockefeller retired. Shelley Moore Capito, Republican, ended up winning that seat quite comfortably. And I suspect that probably Jim Justice, the sitting governor, is favored to get nominated and favored to flip that seat next year. So that would make, if nothing else changes, that would make the Senate 50-50, contingent on the vice president. And the Republicans have some other attractive targets, specifically in Trump-won states, John Tester in Montana and Sherrod Brown in Ohio. There are a number of other kind of light blue state Democratic Senate incumbents who are for tough races next year. The Republicans don't have a lot of defense to play. Maybe Ted Cruz in Texas, maybe Rick Scott in Florida, but Senate I think is looking pretty decent for Republicans. Although I can remember saying that in some past cycles, and it didn't necessarily come through for them.
Man, a seminar this Monday with Kyle Kondik. Great to have you, Kyle. Always a great pleasure to spend some time and get your view from Sabato's crystal ball at the University of Virginia Center for Politics. Have a great Thanksgiving. I'm sure it'll be a beautiful one in Charlottesville as we assemble our panel. Jeannie Shanzano and Rick Davis are with us, Bloomberg Politics contributors. We just talked about a lot with Kyle. It's going to take us the better part of the hour to unpack all of it, and we shall, with our signature panel. Jeannie, 81st birthday. By the way, James checks me. Donald Trump is 77. I guess his birthday's in June. 81 years old. Is he not better for getting this out of the way now?
Yeah, get it out of the way. Do it as quietly as possible. But boy, that NBC poll was not much of a birthday gift, Joe. I don't know what you got for your birthday, but hopefully it was far better than NBC gave to Joe Biden, because that really, really was not what you want. And it's the numbers, as you just talked about, pretty bad for Biden.
So what's the bigger turkey than Rick Davis, the one that was on the table being pardoned today, or the commander-in-chief going into this re-election?
I think that if Joe Biden had his way, he'd like to be the one being pardoned and the turkey running for re-election. Because I got to tell you, these numbers out of the NBC poll, I mean, like, I know we're a year out. I know these aren't likely voters. I know all the problems we have with these surveys. But I must tell you, 41% of Democrats disapprove of the job their president is doing. I mean, like, that just screams out loud, like, watch out. They're in your rearview mirror. They're coming for you.
A lot more ahead with Rick Davis and Jeannie Shanzano. That's why we're here. I'm Joe Matthew. This is Bloomberg.
markets, headlines, and breaking news 24 hours a day at Bloomberg.com, on Bloomberg Television, and the Bloomberg Business app. This is a Bloomberg Business Flash.
It's 121 on Wall Street. We do check markets all day long here at Bloomberg. Another leg up for stocks since our last update, with the S&P now higher by 26 points, up 0.6%. The world's biggest bond market extended its advance toward its best month since March after a $16 billion sale of 20-year treasuries. 10-year U.S. yields reversed course and fell to around 4.4%. S&P on track towards its highest since August. NASDAQ 100 on pace for a 22-month high. Right now, we've got NASDAQ up by 1%. Again, the S&P up 0.6%. The Dow up 0.5%, higher by 180 points. 10-year yield 4.41%. The 2-year 4.89%. Gold down $2 the ounce to $19.78, down 0.1%. West Texas Intermediate crude up 2.9%, $78.10 a barrel on WTI. Microsoft shares up 2.2% after hiring OpenAI co-founders Sam Altman and Greg Brockman to lead its new advanced artificial intelligence research team. Again, recapping, stocks are higher with the S&P up by 0.6%. I'm Charlie Pellet. That is a Bloomberg Business Flash.
You're listening to Bloomberg Sound On with Joe Matthew on Bloomberg Radio.
The turkeys this year were named Liberty and Bell after spending the night in the posh Willard Hotel, as they do each year in this annual tradition. Yeah, these are turkeys. They are then pardoned by the commander-in-chief so they can go live on their lives in a peaceful retirement. The president today, not in the Rose Garden, interestingly. They actually went out on the South Lawn for this one. Massive turkeys.
That's a big bird, man.
I guess eat turkey later this week. Happy 81st birthday to the president. If you're just joining us, though, he's facing some pretty rough polling data. Not that that's new, but, well, it is in this case in terms of a new low when it comes to his approval rating. Rick Davis and Jeannie Shanzano are with us here on this Monday to kick off Thanksgiving week. Bloomberg Politics contributors. And Jeannie, I'll be curious your take on this. As a political scientist, what actually has your attention in this poll and what does not? Because obviously, young people are not happy with the president right now when it comes to Israel, when it comes to student loans, when it comes to a lot of different issues. When you start going into other demographics, there are great concerns about his age that persist, as well as his handling of the economy. What's your takeaway from this poll from NBC News?
You know, I think one thing that really jumped out on the foreign policy front was just what you mentioned, 18 to 34-year-olds. He's 50 points underwater, 70% disapproval on his handling of what's going on in terms of foreign policy, Israel, Gaza. Of course, I think, you know, as you look back at the previous NBC polls, what also jumps out is this is the first time he is losing to Donald Trump. Of course, it's still within the margin of error, but that is a bad sign. I think one of the things we keep hearing from Democrats is that, well, don't worry, in 2011, Barack Obama, he wasn't doing well, but he was able to pick it up. But never once was he losing to a Republican. And that's where Joe Biden, unfortunately, finds himself yesterday, the day before his birthday. So those numbers are really, really troubling. I also have some good news. If we can talk good news, or like maybe the sky isn't falling since it's Thanksgiving, I'll say later. But so I don't want to leave it all negative, but it's a concerning poll.
Yes, it is. Rick, you just weighed in on that a couple of moments ago, and I wonder what would be your biggest concern. Is it losing young people as a Democrat because they tend to more closely align with your politics? And this is a president who's tried to embrace their politics, sometimes in the case of student loans, not always to their satisfaction. Or are you more concerned about older people, knowing that young people are not terribly reliable on Election Day?
Yeah, look, I'm kind of the latter. You know, I leave young people to Jeannie. She has to teach them. Obviously, she's not doing her job right, as the Democrats would believe. because they are definitely not liking this guy, Joe Biden. But they don't vote. They don't show a propensity to vote. Every chance they have to show up and really turn an election, other than on abortion and referendums and off-year elections, they stick to their issues, right? Abortion, gay marriage, cannabis, the stuff that really gets them out. Presidential politics doesn't. I mean, I think they have the right attitude. I mean, presidential politics is meaningless to most of them, and it shows up in a lot of the polling. So it's not surprising to me that Uncle Joe's getting a bad shake with young voters, but that's not what's got him worried. What's got him worried is their own base. The idea that Democrats are sort of bailing on this guy. When you look at the matchups with Trump isn't moving up at all, right? He is exactly where he's been all year long. It's where Biden is headed, and that's a digression of independent voters and his base, Democrats. Now, you have to assume the Democrats are going to come back, right? I mean, you get through all this primary stuff, and when you got a head-to-head, if it is Donald Trump and Joe Biden. And by the way, Biden's got a lot easier path to his nomination than Trump does, even though we all assume Trump's going to be the nominee at this stage. Then those Democrats likely will come home. If they don't, that is the number one issue for Biden. He can't even start thinking about independent voters unless he's got his base intact.
Well, this might help with the base. Jeannie, the president was reportedly close to, over the weekend, a deal to see more hostages released, potentially a good number of hostages from Gaza. Today, he was asked about that at the Turkey event. He was working the rope line, and a reporter you'll hear yelling at him. The president's response, here he is.
Sir, is a hostage deal near? Mr. President, is a hostage deal near? I believe so, but I'm not prepared to talk. Believe so? Yes. Thank you.
I believe so, he said. Then when asked, you believe so? He said yes, and held up his crossed fingers, hoping that there would be some news here. Jeannie, how important will that be for progressives to see that development, assuming it happens?
Yeah, the band leader really struck up that music when he was trying to answer. I love that.
How true.
It's critically important because those are the kinds of things that can change really, really quickly, results like the one we've seen in this poll. And so if we do see a hostage return safely, if we do see a pause, say a 5-day pause that goes along with that, that will help the president. And, that is what we have to keep in mind. Not only is it early, not only is this a national poll, but events find a way of transforming what we're seeing here. And, I also think we heard from Senator Blumenthal over the weekend, and he said something really, really critically important. And that is, as much as people are discontented in the United States, and not just Democrats, Republicans, independents, the most important thing is to see how they're behaving at the polls. And what have we seen? Democrats have been coming out and they have been winning, whether it's Kentucky, whether it's Ohio. We just saw this happen the other day. That matters, their behavior at the polls and the organization that got them out there so Democrats could perform. Democrats have been overperforming in elections. So there are some good signs for Democrats out there. This poll is not necessarily one of them, but there are other things that can change the trajectory, events, and what's been happening at the polls. And in defense of young people, they do have a lot to offer, and they do get out to vote, and I think they will get out to vote. They, of course, are discontented by a lot of things going on, and I think rightly so. So we I think, should listen to them very, very carefully.
Well, you wonder if more of them should be running, Rick, with the number of retirements that we're seeing here. I talked to Kyle Kondik about that a little while ago, where I believe we're in excess of 30 lawmakers now at this point. Representative Kildee added his name to the list last week that many will remember for Joe Manchin announcing. What's your take on the impact that this will have on the campaign trail, the balance of power here in Washington? Or is Kyle right? A lot of these seats will stay right with the party now occupying them.
Yeah, sure. I don't think anybody's predicting this to be a swing election in the sense that, there's any one party that has a significant advantage going into the cycle. We're just now entering 1 year into election day. So I don't get the impression that pollsters are telling us that there's going to be a significant move. So you would assume that in most of these cases, they're going to be pretty much the same kinds of candidates that win the nomination that will then try to contest for these open seats. I would say to watch out for, because the one thing that has changed cyclical elections is Donald Trump, and that's for the worse, not for the better. There have been many cyclical races, like just the midterms a year ago, that Donald Trump was able to get some of his own weaker Republican candidates nominated because he controls a lot of primary voters, and that hurt our ability to contest elections. So we haven't talked much about, the Trump campaign and their operation trying to load up his kind of candidates for these seats, but we could anticipate that that's going to happen. It's happening right now. And if we put weaker candidates into these open seats, we can't assume that we're going to hold them. And Democrats will take advantage of that, just like they did in the midterm.
Maybe one exception there is going to be George Santos's seat, Jeannie. We'll see about that as we talk more about the future plans of the gentleman from New York. What's happening in Arizona has our attention now, though. This is, we mentioned Joe Manchin. Look at what's happening to Kyrsten Sinema, now being targeted by Republicans after announcing her decision to move to the independent column here. Republicans are coming after her in Arizona, and we'll talk more about why coming up with Rick and Jeannie after we update you on world and national news. For that, we go back to New York. Leslie Lotto has the latest for us from the newsroom. Hey, Leslie.
Joe, a storm in the Midwest could cause some issues at airports as T-Day travel kicks into high gear. It comes as a TSA expects the busiest Thanksgiving travel period on record. AAA expects 49 million people will drive 50 miles or more, and the airlines expect 30 million people to fly. Gas prices nationwide down, averaging $3.30 a gallon. AAA spokesperson Don Shoup recommends patience when traveling.
For these big holidays, taking the automobile is the #1 mode of transportation. It's also the most economical for families.
For these big holidays, taking the automobile is the #1 mode of transport, he says. As people prepare for the holiday, on Joe Biden's birthday, he spared a couple of big birds from the holiday table, as presidents do. Biden, in the annual holiday tradition, pardoned 2 turkeys, Liberty and Bell, who made the journey to Washington from a farm in Minnesota.
I hereby pardon Liberty and Bell. All right. Congratulations, birds.
Former First Lady Rosalind Carter will be laid to rest next week. She passed away at the age of 96 on Sunday afternoon after she was diagnosed with dementia back in March. Global news 24 hours a day and whenever you want it with Bloomberg News Now. I'm Leslie Lotto, and this is Bloomberg.
Profits. Headlines and breaking news 24 hours a day at Bloomberg.com, on Bloomberg Television and the Bloomberg Business app. This is a Bloomberg Business Flash.
It's 1:40 on Wall Street. We do check markets all day long here at Bloomberg, and we begin with an update on the turmoil at OpenAI. Most of OpenAI's employees have threatened to resign and follow ousted leader Sam Altman to Microsoft unless the current board resigns. Right now, we are looking at Microsoft shares advancing by more than 2%. A letter has now been signed by about 700 of the artificial intelligence firm's roughly 770 employees. It states that the signatories are, quote, unable to work for or with people that lack competence, judgment, and care for our mission and our employees. Again, latest development, that letter now signed by roughly 700 of the employees at OpenAI. We've got stocks gaining. S&P 500 index now up by 31 points, up 0.7%. 10-year yields reversed course and fell to 4.41%. The S&P rising toward its highest since August. Again, the S&P up by 0.7%. The Dow higher now by 0.5%. NASDAQ up 148 points, up by 1%. So, where to invest in this market? Phil Orlando is Chief Equity Market Strategist at Federated Global Investment Management.
And our feeling is that the stocks that have been left for dead, domestic large cap value, small cap domestic growth, international, those are areas that are unloved. They're trading at very modest PE multiples, low betas, very high dividend yields. So we've started to see those stocks play catch up here in the last couple of months, and we think that's a trend that plays out over the course of calendar 24.
And you can hear more of that conversation with Phil Orlando on the Surveillance Podcast. You can download it wherever you get your podcasts. Again, recapping, we do have stocks advancing with the S&P up 31 points now, up by about 0.7%. I'm Charlie Pelleton. That is a Bloomberg Business Flash.
This is Bloomberg Sound On with Joe Matthew on Bloomberg Radio.
The gloves are coming off in the state of Arizona. Remarkable situation as we remember this seat held by Kyrsten Sinema is going to be quite the race in the new year here as she decides not to run or continue governing, for that matter, as a Democrat. Ruben Gallego, who you've heard from on this program, the congressman running against her as a Democrat. And then there's Kari Lake on the Republican side, among others. The NRSC here in Washington, D.C., this is, of course, the group in the Republican Senate that is tasked with focusing and funding these races, has decided to go after both the independent and the Democrat in this case. An ad running here that targets both Kyrsten Sinema and Congressman Gallego, and it gets personal. Let's listen.
In Arizona, voters have a choice. There's Rotten Ruben Gallego. He was a spokesman for a crooked bank that targeted immigrants and abandoned his wife when she was nearly 9 months pregnant, then married a D.C. lobbyist. Or there's Senator Kyrsten Sinema. Sinema voted for President Biden's agenda 100% of the time, backed Biden's green energy bill, even helped pass Biden's American Rescue Plan. Deadbeat dad or liberal Democrat? Arizonans deserve a better choice.
Wowee. Okay. The new ad is titled A Choice, Rotten Ruben versus, what was it, liberal? And we're just getting started here. By the way, Kyrsten Sinema hasn't even announced her plans to run yet. Let's reassemble the panel. Rick Davis and Jeannie Shanzano join Bloomberg Politics contributors. Rick, of course, looms large when it comes to Arizona politics and knows the way it works better than most. What's happening here, Rick? Is this the right strategy? And what is actually the strategy by the Republicans paying for this ad?
First of all, there's never a right strategy for a three-way race like this. Anybody will tell you the one thing you cannot figure out is how to actually manage a three-way race. And so what the NRSC has done is they've basically taken the bulldozer and said, you know what, anybody who doesn't have an R next to their name is going to get an attack ad by us. And in this case, they actually did it a very budgetarily sound way. They attacked two different candidates from two different parties all in one ad.
In the same ad. Yes.
In the same ad. And I must admit, I think Rubin gets a much better treatment from the point of view of a negative campaign ad. You know, Rotten Rubin criticizes him dumping his wife with 9 months of pregnancy, marries a lobbyist. And then all Cinema is liberal. I mean, come on, they can do better than that. There's got to be something they can, go after Cinema on. It reminds me of Arthur Finkelstein, who Jeannie will remember, a famous pollster who used to dub Mario Cuomo too liberal, too long. Well, Cinema, you're going to get that treatment for a while, especially because she's picking up all these Republican votes who actually aren't going to probably vote for the candidate that the Republicans are going to nominate, and that's probably Kari Lake.
Well, that's the problem here, right? Jeannie, is this then basically a pro-Kari Lake ad without saying it?
Yeah, but they can't say it because they look back at her last election and they say, oh, no, gosh, she lost. And why did she lose? Because she couldn't hold Republicans. So, you look at Maricopa County, tens of thousands of Republicans voted for Katie Hobbs. So if they think Kristen Sinema is too liberal, look at Katie Hobbs. Republicans went to her. So their big problem is a problem of candidate quality. Their big problem is that they don't have a strong Republican to put up against these two. So they're going to, if indeed, to your point, Sinema decides to run, so they're going to try to take them both down. They'd be better off spending their money trying to attract a Republican who's attractive to Republicans versus going against Sinema and Gallego.
Gallego's campaign did respond to this, Rick, calling it a baseless, deeply personal attack against Rubin. They call him a deadbeat dad and talk about his leaving his wife when they were expecting, something that he has explained away as having dealt with some very serious emotional issues as a combat veteran, his PTSD, for instance. The response reads, an attack against Rubin this early means the GOP is going all in to beat him. And with support from the NRSC and Mitch McConnell, Kari Lake just got a big boost from the Republican establishment in Washington. He calls it, as I mentioned, a baseless, deeply personal attack on his birthday of all days, just 3 days before Thanksgiving. Can this type of thing backfire, or this is just politics?
No, I'd say well done on the NRSC to actually launch an ad on a guy's birthday. I had never thought about that, but it's a great concept.
Wow.
Yeah, absolutely. It's politics. It's blood sport. What is he talking about? I mean, this guy got ahead in politics by being a ruthless purveyor of the dark arts, and now they're being used against him for a while. I mean, come on, buck it up. Nobody in Arizona likes a wuss. I mean, they want a fighter.
Rick Davis.
And so, look, I mean, if he wants to wear his military service on his sleeve, then he's got to expect some incoming. And so, look, I think everybody should move to Arizona this election cycle, because between this race and the presidential, it's going to be the best political theater in the entire country for an entire year. So I'm certainly going to take precedence.
So they call him a deadbeat dad. They come after his marital history here. Jeannie, I'm curious your thought. A Marine veteran from Iraq has been forthright, as Politico pointed out today, about his struggles with PTSD and survivor's guilt, which he blamed in his memoir for the unraveling of his first marriage. He and his ex-wife remain good friends. His 6-year-old son is frequently seen with him at work. Is this just the way it goes in politics, like Rick says?
It is the way it goes, but don't you remember a nicer time, Joe, when Republicans were supportive of our veterans? I mean, can't we get back to that, or have we been so Trumpified that now we just attack everybody? The reality is Republicans are running scared because their nominee is likely to be Kari Lake, who, again, cannot hold Republicans in the state of Arizona. Look again at those outcomes and the results of the last election in Maricopa County. They voted Republicans for Katie Hobbs. Why are they focusing on Gallego? Because they can't do anything about Kari Lake. She's sitting there. She likely will get the nominee, and Republicans will once again run scared. But this time it's not Katie Hobbs. It's going to be to Gallego, or it's going to be to Sinema if she chooses to run.
Jeannie Shanzano and Rick Davis, we better get to Arizona. I'm Joe Matthew in Washington. This is Bloomberg.